Good afternoon and welcome to the WIO Global International Scholarships Showcase for 2022. And we're delighted that we'll be welcoming Ambassador Richard Holwill with Skiba, with students from all over the university presenting their work. And then in the late afternoon, we'll be honoring the work of our international faculty and faculty who are doing international work. My name is Caroline McCracken-Flesher. I'm the director of the Center for Global Studies. And I would like to introduce Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Wyoming, Anne Alexander, to launch this afternoon's events. Anne Alexander is an advocate for internationalization like no other at UW. Her vita includes work at the State Department, leadership of international programs at UW, countless international engagements, and the hugely popular study abroad course, Viking Economics. Now, as I was putting these remarks together, I realized that I couldn't imagine anybody less like a Viking than Anne Alexander. And then, however, I internationalized my gaze and I realized that if exploration and persistence and intellectual courage are the mark of a Viking, then we have our very own Viking at UW in the person of Anne Alexander. So onwards, Dr. Alexander, let's get this afternoon of exploration started.
Caroline, Dr. McCracken-Flesher is, as always, beautiful with words and has done an extraordinary job along with the team in global engagement of pulling this together. Welcome to our friends online. Welcome to everybody. I'm delighted to see so many friends here. I have not hugged that much in many months, years perhaps, so it's wonderful to do that. And this day is going to, I think, exemplify kind of the life and times that we are in right now. On the one hand, we are in some very dark and bleak times. There's the unimaginable aggression on Ukraine by Russia, which Ambassador Holwill, thank you for coming. Your first visit to the University of Wyoming. We're so glad you're here. And my friend, Dr. Skiba, will talk about. But on the other hand, we also have our amazing students and faculty to showcase. Some of the students who will be providing you with some really cool sessions on what they've done in their education abroad or in their international research. I know some of you, and you are amazing. And those of you who I don't know, I know you're amazing too, because you wouldn't be on this program if you weren't. And then we'll get to celebrate our amazing international faculty and our amazing faculty and their work internationally. And so on the one side, there's some darkness and some bleakness, but on the other, we have reason for hope because of things like this. I really, really want to give a shout out to the Global Engagement Office, WIO Global for short. The inevitable Caroline McCracken-Flesher, who is our head for the Center for Global Studies. She's amazing and a force to be reckoned with. So in all the best ways. We have our extremely hardworking and persistent and ridiculously talented education abroad staff, who for the past 2 years have been figuring out ways to connect students from Wyoming, from the University of Wyoming to the world, even though they couldn't travel. And our International Students and Scholars Office is tenacious in their advocacy and their assistance to our international students and scholars. It's also been a really hard time for them, and I'm really appreciative to them for all of their work. So I really want you to participate today. We really, really want this to be interactive. Ask lots of questions. On this first session, you have two amazing experts up here. And for the Student Scholarships Showcase, those students know everything there is to know about that topic. So dig in and learn more with them. With that, I will thank everybody for coming today and really, really appreciate your attendance. Go Pokes and go Ukraine.
Pleasure now of introducing our panelists or speakers today. Ambassador Richard Holwill is a career diplomat who served to the rank of ambassador in Ecuador. Today, he's vice president of public policy at Altacor in Washington, D.C., which is the parent company of Amway, a name that you might be more familiar with. There, he manages worldwide government affairs efforts. His areas of expertise include international trade, international investment disputes, and the resolution of business problems in foreign markets. He currently chairs a trade advisory committee for the U.S. trade representatives in the Asia Task Force at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. and he testifies before Congress on international trade issues and U.S. policy toward China. Ambassador Holwill has extensive experience in Asia, Latin America, Europe, the countries of the former Soviet Union, and he has served as a U.S. Marine, experienced Watergate as White House correspondent for NPR, Iran-Contra as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America, and nuclear arms negotiations with the Soviet Union as Counselor for Arms Control and Disarmament. So there are a lot of stories to learn, but we're going to be focused today on Ukraine. Indeed, he has advised presidents from Clinton to Obama and is working most recently with the Biden administration on vaccine production overseas. He has published 2 books on public policy, and you'll see his byline in publications as diverse as The Hill and the Jackson Papers. So welcome, Ambassador Holwill. In conversation with the ambassador on Ukraine, we welcome UW's own Dr. Alexandra Skiva. Sasha Skiba teaches economics in the College of Business, and his areas of research include international economics, development economics, and industrial organization. And his publications include positive and negative effects of distance and export prices, how geography affects quality, the trade reducing effects of market power in international shipping. And you can see here potential points of connection, particularly with Ambassador Holwill's recent assignments. But like many of us, locally and in this locally and internationally facing university, Dr. Skiba hails from elsewhere, in this case, Ukraine. And so we welcome them both to this important and really daily shifting conversation. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Bill. So first of all, welcome to this conversation. As a first point, I would like to emphasize that we wanted to keep it as a conversation rather than a lecture. And the reason for that is that you see a lot of news, and presumably since you're here, you're interested in the topics that are related to what's happening in Ukraine. The one thing you can't do is to talk to the television or to talk to the newspaper article and have it talk back to you. So what we want to have here is a real conversation. And please feel free to chime in, jump in, raise your hand, ask a question whenever there's something you want to hear more about. So I'm going to start off with a Richard, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a simple question. We are observing the hostilities, we're observing the brutalities, we're observing the war, we're observing the fighting and the unbelievable resistance of Ukrainian people and the military. But there is also so much that we don't observe. And the way I sort of like to think about you is that you know the Hamilton phrase, I want to be in the room when it happened. I feel like you have been in a lot of rooms when it happened. And so could you tell us your perspective about the bigger picture, what's going on right now before we get into details of this specific conflict and how did it arise historically? What's going on? What do you see here?
I see a clash of civilizations. We've got the 18th century fighting the 21st century. We've got a guy who wants to go back to the age of empires, and we've got the West, where we have established rules of law and a liberal economic order, trying to resist that. I think what's happening now has incredible implications for the remainder of this century. And I think that the resolution of this conflict will set the tone for so much that's going to come after.
That's a great summary. Does anybody else have a question about the big picture of these events? Or the big picture?
If he wants to go back to the 18th century, does he want to be king?
Czar would be a nicer word, I think.
Yeah,
But Samuel Huntington wrote a book, The Clash of Civilizations, and he's talking about the Christian world versus the Islamic world. But what we're seeing here, I think, is a clash of centuries, where Putin would like to return to what it was. Xi Jinping in China would like to return to that system where he can make China into the middle kingdom, the place where everyone comes to pay tribute. But China's got a longer game, and I wrote about that in the paper this morning. I think China is positioned to pick Russia's bones when this is over. And we can get into that later. But I've got a question for him that we'll save to the end, but yes. And when I look at the mistakes he's made, that is Putin's made, it starts with this basic concept of what century we're living in. As she indicated, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. And I happen to play golf with a bunch of retired admirals and generals and others like that at Army Navy Country Club in Washington. So my milieu is somewhat military. And as soon as Putin sent in those tanks, the guys I know who served in ground forces said he's made a major mistake. We all knew that he had the little green men who could take over in Crimea and in Eastern Ukraine, but he didn't do that kind of asymmetrical warfare, that kind of low intensity warfare. He went with tanks. Now, I saw you clap about the Marine Corps. Marines have just given up all of their tanks. And the reason is simple. Armor in the 21st century is vulnerable to drones, to remote missiles, to everything. And what did sorry, I'm stuck in a different century myself. What did the Russian commanders tell their troops? Oh, they're going to throw flowers at you. They're going to wave and applaud when you roll through. They did. The tanks rolled through. They flew through flowers at them. And as soon as they passed, they attacked the fuel truck. And the tanks were stranded.
That was smart.
So what you're seeing is a guy who is thinking in terms of World War II, but fighting in terms of something much, much different.
Comment on that, because it sounds like the same transition point, I think it was around World War I, when the horse met the tank.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, remember when Patton was developing the whole military unit around tank warfare, and then wanted to test
He developed that by chasing Pancho Villa in Mexico. But yeah, he recognized that motorized vehicles were the future. But you have to understand that motorized vehicles have to fight a combined arms offensive. That is to say, you have to have infantry to protect the tank, so the tank can protect the infantry. But the Russian troops would not get out of their APCs, their armored personnel carriers. That is a failure of the NCO Corps, the non-commissioned officer corps of the Russian army. They have such a top-down structure that the captains and lieutenants can't order a new movement without checking with the people above them. But you look at the way we fight, the way the Marine Corps fights, I was taught, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Wouldn't believe I was watching a radio announcer. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. You've got to know what you're going to do when that happens. So US NCOs are trained to take initiative. Russian NCOs froze. That is the key to the battlefield. What happens next? Russia has no choice but to do in Ukraine what it did in Qistina, which was blast the hell out of the place. Grozny, after the war, was ground down to rubble. Worse than what you're seeing now in these.
I was wondering why he wanted this place that he's destroyed. Why he wanted this place that he destroyed. Powell, I guess.
And here I'm going to make another statement that I can't back up. He seems obsessed with his western border. He seems obsessed with the idea that all invasions of Russia come from Germany or Sweden or whatever. He forgot that the Mongols were the first to invade. And he's forgetting about his vulnerability in the East, which is what my publication today is about. Russia is rich in terms of China is rich in terms of productive capability, but short in terms of resources. Russia's Far East, which is that portion of Siberia from Lake Baikal to the coast, is resource rich. They've got gold, silver, copper. They've got bauxite for aluminum. They've got
uranium.
They've got uranium, but they've got something else I'm trying to remember. The cobalt, which is needed for electric vehicle batteries. And they've got coal. China's got a massive coal shortage right now. They've got natural gas. The population of Russia's Far East is about 6 million people. The 3 provinces that border the Russian Far East have a population of over 160 million. Now, Putin has been trying to develop the Far East. He's promised billions in aid. He's giving away land for free, and still the population declined by 100,000 last year. There was a recent survey by the All Russia public opinion firm found that 48% of the people in the Far East want to leave. I'll get you 1 second. But they can't. There's no real economic opportunity elsewhere. What does China have? People. Russia can't develop the Far East because the people don't want to go there. China needs those resources. China is not afraid to go establish a colony, as they've done in Malaysia, as they've done in Sri Lanka, as they've done in Ethiopia. They send their people to build a Chinese civilization and exploit the resources of that region. The country I know and love well, Ecuador, is facing some of this right now with Chinese who are building pipelines. They don't hire Ecuadorians. They send in their people to build. I envision a day when Russia's Far East is truly dominated by the Chinese.
It used to be Japan that was after it.
Well, Japan has claims on the Seychelles Islands. There's a dispute with Japan as well. This gentleman has been trying to ask me a question for a few minutes.
Be fair, you actually hit a big point on Chinese influence, on the potential for Chinese influence in the Russian Far East. As we go forward and we see the effects of climate change affect things more and more, and we start to see ice-free summers in the Arctic and the expansion of trade routes along those previously, I guess, sustainable trade routes, do you see the Chinese perhaps making a play, I could say maybe by the 2050s, like in developing like places like Vladivostok or Archangel so that they can exploit the economic benefit that's going to come from those trade routes? So
Let's leave Archangel out of it because it's a little too far west. But I do see China dominating Russia's Far East. Chinese farmers are already leasing land in the southern part of that region. Recently I saw a piece in the South China Morning Post where Chinese businesses are rushing to Russia to fill the void left by the Western companies that have left. I don't think 2050 is the right timeline. I think by 2030, you're going to see China dominating that area.
Hi, we have an online question from Maria Almendarez. Please do expand on what China's interest is right now and what their long game might be, whether Russia wins or is pushed back. Does that change their long game or their relationship with Russia?
Yes. But where is China right now? Most observers are saying China is taking Russia's side somewhat passively because it does not want to see domination of the world economy by the Western liberal order. While that may be true, they are not challenging that order directly. What I posit is that you will see China become more aggressive moving north and that Putin is ignoring that threat. Will that change? I don't know. I am throwing that out to be provocative because I don't see other people talking about it. And I'd like for you to come up with your thoughts on it rather than have me sit around and say, I think this, something's going to happen. I don't know what, but we're not going to see a static situation. Certainly.
You mentioned that our pulling some of our economic support out of Russia. Are we also helping fuel Putin's narrative that the West views Russia as the enemy by doing that? And are we by pulling out those economic resources the Russians become dependent on, whether it's the companies and the Chinese moving in or whoever, are we actually enforcing his narrative to its own population?
We are, but what else would you have us do? Would you have us stay and say, this is just fine, we're okay with what you're doing? We're not okay, and we have to find ways to show it.
I think there was a question in the back there.
In the back there, right?
Oh.
Yes,
All right, so I'm just sort of thinking, Russia, can you hear me?
yeah,
Yeah, Russia has invaded and everyone is condemning Russia. The fight is going on, the Ukrainians are pushing back. America does not want to escalate into a world war, we know, but how do you think the West can win in this battle?
I'm sorry, it's not the West, it's Ukraine. It's now
Okay.
Ukraine, it's fighting.
Okay, so, Ukraine wins, I mean, but this is my question to the ambassador. Okay, maybe I don't want to phrase it that way, but how do you think the liberal international order can win? Not necessarily in the battle, the immediate battle, the long-term strategic geopolitics there, because at the same time, we want Russia to be wicked, but we need Russia against China ultimately. So,
where are you from?
I'm from Nigeria, I'm international student.
Yeah, you know Burkina Faso?
Sure.
We used to joke when I was doing arms control negotiations that the Soviet Union was Burkina Faso with missiles. Seriously, there's not, the economy of Russia is roughly somewhere between Malaysia and Indonesia in terms of its standing in the world. Per capita GDP is infinitesimal compared to the West and others. You see some glitz in the cities, but you don't see much outside the cities of Russia. How does Ukraine win? I don't know, but I'm going to ask some provocative questions later in the talk because I think I'd like to end with those questions. But I don't see this ending Putin still in power. Now, let me take you back to the fall of the Soviet Union. They had just fought for 10 years in Afghanistan. The Soviet economy had collapsed. There was no food on the shelves. They couldn't buy clothes. I was in Moscow in '91 and an embassy officer took me to a flea market, Ishlamova Park. And we're walking around and we're seeing everything for sale, including a light bulb. My escort officer picked up the light bulb and said, "What do you see in this?" Well, the filament was broken. Who would sell a burned out light bulb?
See, yeah, I know exactly why it was stolen.
Yeah, you want to tell them?
I mean, I'm assuming, so you can go to a place and
If you're going to steal one from the
Yeah.
office, you got to put something in its place. That's the Russian economy in 1991. But from there on, they had thousands of Russian boys come home in coffins from Afghanistan.
and Ukrainian
And Ukrainian and
Turkmenistan.
all of the Soviet bloc countries. And the people below Brezhnev's inner circle began asking if the Brezhnev doctrine was real. Do we really have to defend socialism everywhere it takes hold? Is it really our job to send our boys to fight these fights when we can't even put food on the shelves? So what happens now when body bags come home from Ukraine and you've got nothing on the shelves? Does Putin survive? I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to make this comment on space. I'm Ukrainian. I'm Ukrainian here. So you probably heard of the battle of like genocide in Bucha. When Russian soldiers were taken Bucha and Irpin, a couple of towns surrounding Kyiv was the capital, surrounding Kyiv for months and shooting civilians to steal clothes, TV, big crates from their flags. And after raiding those towns, we can see left graffitis on the walls say who did allow you to leave that route. They have the hatred because of their poverty and Ukrainians striving for freedom and success and just following the path of joining the European Union and everything. And that's not something about politics, that's about general attitude of average Russian. That's what they feel towards Ukrainians and that was going on in terms of economy. I don't know whether you can imagine, but I'm like following all of the Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking, English speaking channel news, social medias, and what's going on there. They are running out of essential groups, like for even supporting their own K3. And Russian bloggers with 8 million followers now are discussing how to stop using, I don't know, like usual product they used to be using, and switch to like how to stop using toilet paper and switch to using medicine because they don't have it on the shelves anymore so far, and it's been only 1 month so far. Also, you mentioned the size of Russian economy. It's 2%. U.S. economy is 25, 27%. China is probably the same. Russian economy is 2%. But I'm sorry for being a little bit over emotional. I know that the topic of conversation is Ukraine, where for the last 15 years we've been discussing Russia, which is strange a little bit. We should not overestimate Russian role in economy. It's 2%. And I'd love to hear more about Ukrainian future in terms of this war and the economy of Ukraine in terms of what's going on right now with it and the size of support of European countries. I would also ask you a question about what's going on with Hungary right now. Why are they acting with Hungary right now? Why are they acting so bizarre, supporting Russia, Russian oil trade? Why is Austria not banning Russian oil trade? Why that's going on in European countries? They are so close to the border, even like physically.
Those are very good questions, but they're better put to an Austrian or to a German or to someone who is making that decision about buying that oil. The problem with hydrocarbon economics is that if you don't have the infrastructure for supply, you can't switch. So one of the things that the world is trying to do, or at least the United States is trying to do, is find ways to export liquefied natural gas in order to replace Russian natural gas in Germany and some other places. I have good friends in Vienna. I'll go and ask them, but it's not easy to do, and you don't want to bring your economy to a total standstill by cutting off whatever fuel you have. Now, should we be doing more to help Ukraine? Absolutely. How do we do it? There are 100 different things that can and should be done. There's an article today by Alexandra Skiva in the New York Times saying that the United States is being too modest because we're not doing enough. We're too afraid of escalation. And that what we will see with this now is that we will start sending very advanced missiles and Russia will then retaliate by using nukes. I don't know what's going to happen next. I just know that Ukraine has to win and we have to help them. Now, I will add one thing about that. I've worked around the world, and I can tell you that when the United States is seen as the leader of a coalition, there's often a backlash. We are often much more effective if we are behind the scenes than if we are out front in a leadership role. And in that regard, I think that this administration is doing the right thing by letting others take the lead, by letting Poland, Finland, Germany, others lead in these matters. My biggest concern right now is why is Viktor Orban in Hungary not doing more, and how that backlash is playing in his favor in Hungary. So the calculus of the politics is extremely complicated. So, but I go back to what I said before. Ukraine has to win, and I don't see it happening before Putin's coming. This lady has not asked a question.
How do we keep the United States from getting Ukraine war fatigue? Everybody's very enthusiastic and supportive right now, but sooner or later, everybody convinces that inflation is due to this war. Everybody starts to fade in their interest in trying to help in terms of just the general public. It's not really touching us other than what we see. So, or inflation. And we're just wondering how do we ever keep the impetus there to be as helpful as we can be when you have a lot of people fighting it, in the media and stuff.
The news cycle will drive that. And to the degree that the news cycle highlights things like the slaughter in Bucha, the stories will continue. If there were one thing that I wish we could do, it would be to get the information to the Russian citizens. I have a very good friend who is normally based in St. Petersburg. He'd gone on vacation with his family to Cape Town. He's now stranded because his visa to Russia is no longer good. It's from an unfriendly country. But his wife, who is Russian, tells him that my mother believes everything she sees on Channel 1. She doesn't believe anything else. Getting through to them is key to making the substantive change that you need to see in Ukraine. We were talking earlier about the role of the Russian Orthodox Church, parroting the nonsense that comes from the Kremlin. Getting to the church, getting to opinion leaders, that's critical for making change in Russia.
Can I, before we glance over, sorry. We talked about the role of the United States, and just because this conversation is happening in the United States, I want to probe a little further along that dimension. And the specific question that comes up a lot among Ukrainians is that Putin responds to force. And this fear of escalation is unfounded. The three examples that are common is when Russia attacked Georgia, Bush sent a very small contingent of Marines to, I think it was to supervise humanitarian deliveries, and the war stopped. Russia sent the bomber in Turkish airspace, over Turkish airspace, to help Syrians. It was shot down. Putin threatened, I think, to cancel whatever imports of tomatoes, and that didn't last long. And then the third example was when US and allies and Kurdish allies destroyed the Wagner group that was coming to capture a significant oil or gas depot in Syria. And so Ukrainians are looking at this and they're saying, sure, there is escalation. I know the world is afraid of this, but the history shows that Putin is afraid of escalation. Why not do more in that sense? No-fly zone comes up and all other things that are perceived as escalatory. I don't know if that's a word, but what is your thought about that probability of escalation versus being much harder on Putin because that's the language he understands?
It is an open-ended question asking me to imagine what military capabilities are available for such a move and which ones might have the right impact on the situation. The number of troops that we recently sent into the NATO countries is quite significant. I don't have an answer for you, and I'm not going to pretend to come up with something that I think is a magic bullet, but I think that you're right. I think we could be doing something far more visible and far more aggressive in sending a message that you don't want. There's a red line that you can't cross, and you've already crossed it, so back up. I read something in Geopolitical Futures, one of the newsletters I get by George Friedman. And he was talking about escalation. He was saying, I don't fear it quite the way others do, because passing an order to use nuclear weapons will pass through many hands before it's implemented. Any one of those individuals in the chain of command can stop it. They might not stop it, but they might. I don't know the answer. I did nuclear arms negotiations. I know how many missiles they've got. I know how many warheads are on each one of those missiles. I know what they could do if they launched them. What I don't know is whether they maintain the maintenance on them the way they should. And I suspect that they've got a few glitches out there, but I don't want to test that theory. I know what we've got. I've visited the nuclear missile silos in North Dakota. I've been down in those silos to see how they work. I've been on a nuclear what's called a boomer, nuclear attack submarine. This kind of stuff could lead to the end of the world. We have to be careful, but we have to send stronger messages. Gentleman over here is waiting to come back to you.
During the SALT,
Could you, I was artillery in the Marine Corps.
during SALT, back in the what, 80s,
Yeah,
one of my very good friends has passed on, but anyway, he was commanding part of that operation in the SALT treaties.
Yeah.
From Yokota, Japan. The stories he can tell you about the Russian missiles, there was no maintenance.
Yeah.
They were totally corroded. If they had tried to launch it, they probably would have exploded on the pad or on their mobile launch pad. But yeah, I had just one, is Radio Free Europe, are they active right now into Russia? Because the Russians all have radios. They did back in the Soviet days, and they still have it.
they do, and I do think it is operating, and I think it is operating effectively. When I was doing arms control negotiations, I visited Soviet nuclear facilities in Kazakhstan and in Ukraine too. What I saw was scary. And maybe they had to put on a show for us. These were Potemkin missiles, if you will, but they were missiles nonetheless, and they're scary. And they can throw 10 warheads each. So there is a fair degree of escalation. I am not terribly afraid of what they call hypersonic, because we can't make them work well. We've tried, and the technological challenges of going Mach 5 and then into a glide vehicle, that's not as easy as some people would make it sound. But if you want the world to think you've got them, say you've got them. That's all I can say. With the question. Ma'am.
Richard, other than military or military confrontation, are there diplomatic, informational, economic things that we can do to move away or to avoid military direct confrontation?
I think the most important right now is information, and cracking through the Russian cyber wall is critical. I have to say one thing, everything I've written about this has been wrong. The first thing I wrote for the Jackson Hole Center was, he's not going to attack. He's going to use the little green men like he did in Crimea, like he did in Donbass. No, he attacked. And then I said, okay, the Russian army, they're mechanized, they're strong, they know what they're doing. If they crush the Ukrainian military forces east of the Dnieper, it's going to be over. But if the Ukrainian forces pull back to the west, you can play for a dividing Ukraine. Nope. The Russian military forces were vastly overrated. This is the scary Red Army that we were afraid of. No, this is a bunch of amateurs, kids on a one-year rotation. You can't teach somebody to do something in 1 year. The lack of discipline, the other issues. So anyway, I was wrong on all those counts. I'm not going to, I am so impressed with the way the decentralized Ukrainian forces are fighting that I would give them all promotions. They are great. But information, I don't think Putin has a mandate to slaughter people. Even those who want to see Russia establish control over the near abroad don't really want to go kill every Ukrainian in Ukraine. There is a civilization. There is humanity in Russia. I have good Russian friends who, if they knew about this, would be repelled by it, but they don't know. And getting that information to them is critical. One of the individuals that I know reasonably well was Russia's ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. I'm not pronouncing his name.
Kislyak, Sergei Kislyak.
So I got to know him first when we were doing arms control negotiations, because he's a known arms control negotiator. But then my company brought him up to see the headquarters and flew him up to California to give a speech. And I was with him on that trip and spent a lot of time talking to him. I actually invited him to come out here and go hunting. He's a big hunter, but he is Ukrainian by birth. And he tells me that, yeah, but many Ukrainians really want to be a part of Russia. I would love to sit down with Sergei right now and see what he thinks, because I know that he knows the truth. And I know him well enough to know that he doesn't support what's happening.
You mentioned the importance of the church earlier. In your opinion, do you think the recognition of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was a significant force that led to the situation we find ourselves in today, or is this just was the invasion just a matter of time?
I'd like Sasha to answer that.
Yeah, so I think my opinion is, and I'm by no means an expert on the sort of theology and organization. My opinion is that that did not change much. I think I think Putin made up his mind. Sorry, he expressed that he made up his mind in 2007, which means that the decision was made earlier. And maybe it was 2004 when we had our first popular uprising against massive voter fraud that put into power a pro-Russian president, who was later ousted, during the Revolution of Dignity that then prompted Russian invasion of Crimea. I think that might have been a factor, but I think that this has been long coming. And coming from Ukraine, I just want to, I understand that for some observers in the West, this is new. We were shocked by this. A lot of people in Western Ukraine, people I know, my relatives, relatives of my relatives, some of them who are not alive anymore, this is not a surprise. 1991, we voted for independence. I was 14, we were excited. Something new, hope. The older generation who lived through World War II, who was sent to Siberia, whose relatives, like my grandmother's 6 siblings who died during Holodomor, the man-made famine of 33, who killed about 13 million Ukrainians. They looked at us and they said, this is not it. This is not over. We were saying, what are you talking about? Grandma, you don't understand. We voted, we're independent. And they were saying no. And the phrase they kept saying, there will be blood. Because Russia is not going to let you out that easily. And honestly, 14, mostly educated on Soviet view of the history, it was hard to see. But then when 2004 happened, when Russia was involved in every little thing that was happening in Ukraine, and then 2014, I remember to this day, 2008, 1 year after Putin delivered his speech in the Munich Security Conference saying that he sees the breakdown of Soviet Union as the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of 20th century or history. I forgot what he said, but when 2008, CNN shows Russian troops rolling into Georgia. I looked at a friend of mine from Finland, and we immediately said, Crimea is next. And we both nodded. 2008. So to answer your question, I think that probably played a role, a nuanced role with the church. But I think that this has been in the motion for a long time. And I just think that I don't know, I'm torn because I just can't believe the West didn't see it, the way a grandma saw in 1991.
Right.
I wonder, I was just thinking about the examples you gave, Sasha, earlier about Putin backing down when force confronts his aggression. And I acknowledge each of those examples and wonder what might have happened if things played out a bit differently earlier on. For instance, I've wrestled a little bit with whether it was a mistake in advance if we had clearly communicated when there was a clear buildup on the Russian border with Ukraine that this is a red line that we intend to stand by this time, other than Syria, by moving, not withdrawing our military advisors, but adding to them and, showing a presence in Ukraine, whether that would have potentially realigned Putin's calculus about entering or the way that he entered. But then I also think, well, things have unfolded in a certain way, and now we see a united NATO in a way that we haven't seen before. And had we unilaterally brought in a military presence on the US part, we might not see a Germany reinvigorated in its self-defense and a voice of unity that we see now on the question of Russia vis-a-vis the West. So that's a separate thought process. But I'm wondering if there were to be some sort of check on Putin where we say, now there's a red line and we want you to not only stop, but to back off. Would it have the same effect that such challenges in the examples you mentioned earlier did have? Or in the Russian psychology, is Ukraine a special case? I wonder whether, I don't know that much about Russian history, but what little I know, the Kievan Rus they view it as the birthplace of the Russian people, and what Putin seems to have communicated in his rants about leading up to and right after the invasion, he seems to have not an us and them thought about Ukraine, but that's our territory, that's us. So would it pose to him an existential threat as opposed to just a check on adventurism abroad?
I heard Fiona Hill answer a very similar question. Fiona Hill, if you don't know, was she was on the National Security Council as the top Russia expert. She has a long and distinguished career in international intelligence, but as an analyst. And she is the one said to know Putin's mind better than anyone else. And basically she said that would to him be failure. He could not accept it. He will not do it. I'm not Fiona Hill. I don't know if that's right, but I just know that that's what I heard an expert say. But let me take that premise to a different point. Let me go back to some ancient history for a moment. If you remember when the US and the Soviet Union signed START II, they actually did it here in Wyoming, at property owned by the University of Wyoming. There were rumors spread by Russian diplomats at the time, or Soviet diplomats, that Baker had pledged to Shevardnadze that the United States will respect your sphere of influence. Now, I was in a very high-ranking position, engaged with START at that time. I was counselor. That was part of my job to know that. I saw nothing of that type in any cable I read. However, about 4 or 5 weeks later, George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, gives a speech in Kyiv in which he describes the long-term relationship between Ukraine and the Commonwealth of Independent States. And he uses the term, do not flirt with suicidal nationalism. William Safire wrote a column calling it the Chicken Kiev speech. I don't know if any of you ever had chicken Kiev. I haven't, but apparently it's chicken and cheese. I don't know. But that was Safire's comment in the New York Times. 4 weeks to the day later, Ukrainians voted. I think it was 92% voted in favor of independence. What if instead of letting them believe we were going to respect their sphere of influence, we'd taken a harder line and we said, back off, dude. This is over. Build Russia. Let the Ukrainians, let the other countries have their future. Was that a strategic mistake on the part of Baker and Bush? I don't know. Think it through. It's a thought experiment, nothing else.
I just want to, Yeah, I just want to touch on two things that you mentioned about the Ukraine being a special place for Russia. I just want to point out a simple thing. Russia is not a special place for Ukraine. We exist as a nation and we have identity without Russians. Actually, sorry, despite Russians. And so we don't need them. They need us. They need that narrative that they created. The problem with that narrative is that the narrative that I grew up with, that I went to elementary school with, the Soviet narrative, that narrative, that story has appealing features outside of Russia, right? So whatever, fair distribution, all that kind of stuff, it has ideas that find appeal in other countries. That's why you see governments in other countries historically being, in parties. We just came from a study abroad from Argentina. There are strong sort of socialist, tendencies, and there are parties that are represented. They replace that with this idea of Ruski Mir, which is the Russian spiritual place. Other than just being crazy, it's also ill-defined, and it's actually ill-defined. It's actually evil, because what it basically says, whatever Russia does is righteous. And by the way, I don't think I'm actually paraphrasing. Like, it's literally what it is. If you are against Russia, you against the good in the world. The problem is that there is an immediate internal issue with that, right? If you are from Chechnya, or if you are from Buryatia, if you are from, I'm just naming, nationalities or small parts of Russia in the eastern, in East Russia, I don't know how that fits with Ruski Mir, part of which, which depends on Ukraine being part of it. So I honestly think that them going that way, first of all, it requires the historical narrative of, Kiev being Kiev, mother of Russian cities. That's the phrase that they have. Kiev mать города русских. And so they need Ukraine. They create this narrative to justify, like, how do you go from that to justifying the massacres in Bucha? And I'm sure there's many more to come. I mean, the jump is, to me, I don't see from one to another. In Putin's head, it seems to make perfect sense. And I think that's a real danger, because I don't know if you can fight an irrefutable theory. If there's a theory that does not have a point and that can be, not even like, it's not that it's impossible to, like, that we don't have a good argument against it. It's impossible to refute. And so that's kind of what they act on. So that's about that. And then the second thing I want to mention is about this nationalism that Russia keeps bringing up, and the chicken Kiev speech brought it up. If you sort of think, and by the way, I'm not an expert in this, and I know there are more experts in this room, so please correct me if I'm wrong, or don't. There is a continuum of, concepts that we use to express our relationship to our country and our nation. Patriotism, sounds good, right? Nationalism, a little edgy. Fascism, ooh, right? What Russia is doing now is fascism. You look by any definition, that's what they're doing. They're putting their nation above others, and they are attacking other countries, and they have a dictator. No matter how this is what Ukraine is doing, is patriotism that Russian interprets as nationalism and equates with fascism in their heads. Because Ukrainians as a nation, as a part of the empire, anybody in Ukraine who would say, I vote for independent Ukraine, from the standpoint of Russia, it was immediately perceived that, hey, are you against us? No.
156.
Oh,
well.
6 minutes. Okay. And and Russia has very successfully done that. Flip those terms, patriotism, swap that for nationalism, and then just went down that road of saying, hey, look, these are, nationalism is basically the same as fascism, which is amazing, because that's exactly what they do, and that's nothing what Ukrainians do. And but to their domestic audience, it works. Anyway.
I kind of want to go off of that, and I kind of want to bring it back to something you mentioned earlier when it comes to getting the information to the people of Russia. After we started to see, BBC, CNN, and all these major Western news organizations start to back out from Russia in the wake of the invasion, a very interesting trend was noticed on the App Store through Russia, and that was the top search results turned to VPNs so that people could still find a way to access that. So I think we're seeing the people who want to know, they will find a way to know. The question is, what is the actual importance of them knowing? Because what is the importance of public opinion in Russia in that regard? Is, you know, because I've talked to a lot of Russian people too who are very against, you know, this invasion. I know people who were protesting in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, in Kaliningrad, and they came out in mass to show it, but you don't see that. And again, that doesn't really seem to affect how the regime moves forward. So I guess realistically speaking, what is bringing the truth? Bring them.
You raise a good point, but in every kind of information war, there is a saturation point and a tipping point. We've not gotten to either. There aren't enough people who are revolted and who are willing to stand up, but at some point, the security police are going to say, I'm not going to beat this kid up anymore.
So ultimately, is the goal regime change?
I say yes. Joe Biden said yes, and then his staff walked it back. Because you don't want to telegraph that kind of a move. And we don't have the ability to make a change. That change has to be organic from within Russia. It can't come from outside.
So this comes to my question. I'm going to take moderator's privilege and ask a question close to the end, but I will say that we probably can run a little over, up to 10 minutes. No more, because I know this is an important discussion. So my question is this, and it ties together, I think, these pieces. You mentioned how powerful in Russia the narrative of origins in Ukraine is, right? And it's evident that in any such circumstance, right, people align according to their leaders, their nations, at least quite strongly, right? When we do the same kind of thing. So then the question becomes, it goes back to yours, how do you retell the story, right? If the goal is to separate children from the people, to tell a different, fuller, more significant story that would separate, begin to bring in doubts to this alignment in Russia between Putin and people who are getting fed up with different narrative. What kind of story makes that difference? You said, Richard, that just the sort of overwhelming narrative of people of loss of Russians will begin to tip that point, or Russian inability to feed themselves and so on. But there are other kinds of stories too, about origins and relationships and so on. Are there stories like that we should be trying to advance?
I've learned a lot from Sasha here, because my initial take on the speech that Putin gave prior to the invasion was he's not speaking to the Western countries. He's not speaking to Ukraine. He's speaking to China, saying to China, this is our Taiwan. That cynicism is something that will play against him in the long run. But I've been saving one question that I have for him and for the young lady in the back row. Ultimately, what do you do next if you're Ukrainian? Do you negotiate with a monster who has broken an agreement by invading, who is committing atrocities? Do you call for a ceasefire to stop the slaughter, or do you keep fighting?
We are fighting now.
What do you say? You've got your family still in Ukraine, right?
That's right. My family is staying in Kiev. Every day I have a talk with my grandma, and every day it's like, we're defending the city. We're defending the city. We're defending the city. We're neglecting the fear. We're not here. Everybody is staying in Ukraine. And like, I know that knowledge of Ukrainian history is extremely cursory in the US. But I want to just point it out so vividly to everyone. We've been fighting for freedom throughout the whole history. Since 1654, when the first treaty happened between Moscatelli, which is like the state of Moscow, and Ukrainian state, Since then, we've been fighting against Russian aggression of everything connected to Ukraine. They've been banning our language, they've been banning our culture, they've been banning our religion, everything. To us, it's not a question of negotiation, of trying to find a way with Russia. After what happened in Bucha, after what happened in Mariupol, Mariupol is a city of the size of Florida. I mean, it's 500,000 people being just killed everywhere. There is not, and you cannot find a building there not damaged, not bombed there. The feeling that Ukrainians have towards Russians are not like, oh, let's sign a peaceful treaty and then we'll find out our way through it. No, it's a feeling of powerful hatred and even vendetta. And that's important to say that it's fighting against the regime and against imperialistic narrative. Because they've been carrying this imperialistic idea of title nations throughout the history even of the USSR, right? In the USSR, every nation which has been like an entity of the huge state have been oppressed by Russian regime. And you can even track it by the cultural parts that have been untouched. The only cultural part that Russia is not trying to ban is national dance. Other, they are just demolishing, damaging fully. And that is why we are fighting against imperialistic idea, and most Russians are praising themselves with this idea. You've mentioned the importance of carrying the information. My grandfather's sister lives in Russia for the last 15 years, I believe. And throughout the whole period of this 15 years, she's been having like weekly talks to my parents, to my grandparents, and they have access to all the information. They just don't want to take it seriously. When they see, you may think that they don't have an access to internet or something. They don't see the photos from Bucha. I speak Russian. I'm fluent. I don't speak Russian, but I'm fluent. The video interviews of Russian citizens being asked, what do you think about Bucha? You've seen the photos of killed children, of communal graves. You've seen all this stuff. What do you think about that? Mostly, like 2 of 10 said, probably Russia is going to have a dark future. Others said, it's a fake. It's a fake. Can you really propaganda that's been delivered throughout the last 15 years? I remember me being 11, getting asked by Russia, a 6-year-old boy, like ridiculous question about Ukraine. They've been raised with it since forever, and I don't really see the chance to change it with starting delivering new information or a different way of delivering the information. Because they are percepting everything through the lens of imperialism, and Russia is having this unique position on that part of the world, which is not true.
So they, you finish with information. I'm gonna hit on information and come back to negotiating with terrorists. The information, I think, the narratives that we need to promote. I'll tell you very easy what's the criteria. Are the ones that Russia is putting people to jail for? For example, equating Hitler's or certain aspects of Hitler's crimes to Stalin's crimes. Can't do that anymore. There is a jail time for doing that. That's part of the narrative that lots of historians, very influential historians all over the world have raised. And again, I'm going to go back to the grandma. Who said like, oh yeah, we've had Germans and Russians go through our villages. Not much difference. So that's one. Second one is, and at that part of that World War II narrative about that Russia somehow is a special nation that somehow beat Hitler. That's their narrative. Like for example, the news that I ran into. Russia has no problem promoting news about units that fought with Germans, from Ukraine, Romania, France, and all that. You can't do the same about the Russian Nazi units who fought for Germany during World War II, because that is a taboo topic, because that's considered undermining the whatever military or official narrative. So I think honestly, like if I had to write a practical guide of topics to cover, is see what you can go to jail for in Russia, and that's probably your list, and don't go to Russia, obviously. And then about the negotiation, that's a really, really, really hard question, because
That's why I'm not going to try and answer it.
I don't, the one part to that answer is that your opinion changes very quickly once you not only see Bucha, but when you know somebody from Bucha or Irpin, or you live there. Like, it's a very different attitude. Lots of things go away. I mean, these, people are willing to fight until they die. There are people in the western part of Ukraine who want to join the fight. They can because of how the territorial defense works. There is people who want to fight. When Ukrainian government asked for 40,000 reserves, they got 100,000 with 800,000 who volunteered. They just didn't need them at that time. So there's lots of capable men and women who are volunteering to fight against Russia. I think every one of them will have a different opinion. I think a lot of them will completely say that this is not there's no option to negotiate. Having said that, our president Zelensky said, he said every war has to end with a treaty. That's how it is. The treaty cannot be, Russian capitulation, obviously, because we don't need Russia. We just want them to get out of our land. And so there's obviously should be some treaty, just because this has to end. But what I was going to mention is that my feeling is that whatever the perception on the spectrum of, how soon some treaty or some decision or some kind of compromise should be made, it's very different here and in Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians are far more willing to fight and sacrifice for what they now see as a fight against evil.
I think we all see it as a fight against evil, and we are all praying and pushing and pulling.
It's like the prey runs faster than whoever's trying to catch the prey.
Yeah.
Because the prey
Carolyn?
is life.
So I want to thank our speakers this afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I hope you're going to stay for the student presentations to follow. And we hope to have further conversations between you both in the future. Thank you.
Goes Global 2022. We're very pleased to have you here with us today for the student portion of the showcase of the papers of our UW students. This first segment is a panel with various literary genres. It includes novel, folklore, and lyrics. And we'll begin with Dalal Bima. Dalal Bima is doing a master's in English, and her faculty advisor is Julia Obert. Her academic and research interests are analyzing literature with the lens of trauma theory and psychoanalysis. Dalal is originally from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. She graduated from Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology with a bachelor's of science in physics and a minor in Spanish. She found a deep appreciation for cultures and languages and loves to explore new places and meet new people. Dalal's hobbies are reading, yoga, and traveling. Her title is From a Leak to a Flood, Transgressing Shame in Nawal El Sadawi's Woman at Point Zero.
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I first want to say thank you to the Global Studies for this opportunity to share our work. And thank you to everybody here for being here and for also listening to our work. Yeah, I'm almost done, so it feels really surreal to wrap it up with the presentation. But yeah, so I'm originally from Saudi Arabia, and I've always been kind of fascinated with banned books, which if it wasn't for this year, it would have been kind of a weird concept, but the United States is currently facing a lot of banning of literature, and that is kind of really interesting being from a place who does that so often.
But I was really intrigued by their content, the banned books content, that is so radical or dangerous for a girl from Saudi. I wanted to learn about such topics and determine by myself whether they were indeed dangerous, and what was it about those texts or those people or those ideas that was so dangerous for me that I needed protection from. And why were my body and mind so fragile in the eye of my community, my parents, my teachers, who often confiscated books from me in school? And then it clicked when I started doing my research. I noticed that there were aspects of life and experience that as an Arab woman, an Arab girl, I was not allowed to learn about. Things that would, quote, alter my own conditioning to become the woman I am supposed to be. And although these ended up kind of in the back of my head, those questions were truly driving my interest in my research and my scholarship, leading me to this project. So yeah, I'll be talking about leakage and shame in the novel Woman at Point Zero. So I want to begin with a brief introduction to the Egyptian feminist Nawal Saadawi. She was a brilliant feminist scholar who wanted to change the state of Egyptian, and I would argue Arab women in general, through her writing and her scholarship. And both her fiction and nonfiction works are raw, unapologetic, and brutally honest. She was a highly interdisciplinary writer who wrote everything from about mental and physical health to philosophy and sexuality. The work I found most fascinating and influential was the one that grappled with the roles of capitalism, religion, and family values in patriarchal discourse. And most importantly, how do we challenge those discourses as people? So because of what she wrote, her work was often censored and banned in the Arab world, and she was imprisoned for it in 1981 and later exiled from Egypt in 1993. So the novel I close read in this essay, Woman at Point Zero, is a true story with fictionalized elements. So based on Saadawi's encounter with a woman in the Qanatir prison in Cairo, Egypt, Firdaus, the protagonist, is a woman who is awaiting her execution for killing her pimp and refuses to talk about her life or case with anyone until the night before her execution. So she allows Nawal Saadawi to come in and talk with her right before that day, leading us to this story of Firdaus and her kind of role in that community. Firdaus begins to tell her story from growing up in a poor family in a rural town in Egypt to moving to Cairo to live with her uncle, who ends up marrying her off to a 60-year-old man who was abusive to her, which led to her running away from him and becoming a prostitute. The age difference was 60 and she was 18 years old. In this novel, Firdaus is often described as, quote, an unrespectable woman, which is particularly aimed at shaming her for the ability to sexualize herself as a prostitute. And although men take part in that sexual activity with her, she is the only one who takes the blame, or the shame falls on her, and quote, like, is polluting society, as one man asserts in the novel, but the men who participate in the act with her are somehow immune to this shame. This displacement of shame from the man to the woman often is kind of in the core of my work in my MA degree. And I will return to a specific passage that I want to close read with you all to kind of unpack the importance of understanding why this displacement occurs and why it plays a really important role in how patriarchal culture is kind of kept alive. So my work was driven by a description in Anne Carson's book chapter, The Gender of Sound, which discusses how ancient cultures such as pre-classical and classical Greek viewed woman as the, quote, creature who puts the inside on the outside by projections and leakages of all kinds, somatic, vocal, emotional, sexual, females expose or expend what should be kept in. This permeation of the inside to the outside is detested by the patriarchal subject since it goes against the softer side, which is a Greek term encompassing the soundness of mind, the temperance, and the self-control that males have. To achieve sophrosyne, the masculine subject has to disassociate the outside from the inside of her. So this feminine tendency to leak, whether vocal, sexual, or otherwise, it urges the patriarchal subject to control that tendency to leak in order to maintain its own dominant position in the gendered hierarchy by stopping this tendency to leak. In other words, women are seen as, quote, leaky, since they might say something or show something that should not be surfaced that could change the masculine softer sign environment. In this chapter, I examine the efforts of men to indoctrinate Arab women's behavior by controlling this porousness. I focus on how this indoctrination in Women 0.0 involves shaming. And shame here is used as a disciplinary affect that works through social sanctioning. As the feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed, which we are kind of making a small fan club in the English department, if you ever attended any of our talks, she talks about how shame has this ability to undo. So she says, the very physicality of shame, how it works on and through bodies, means that shame also involves the deforming and reforming of bodily and social spaces. And in this gendered hierarchy, this deformation of the shamed body is aimed at its reformation. Particularly, we can think towards an ideal of womanhood that the patriarchal subject wants, somebody who's obedient, chaste, and to erase any divergence from that ideal. Ahmed, the scholar, describes how shame is intensified by quote, being seen by others as shame. So in an attempt to escape from being seen as a shamed person, the body turns away, isolating as it sees itself as flawed. This quote, self-negation that happens, as Ahmed describes, from being shamed leaves an imprint on the body, one that reminds the body of its own quote, failure. Because Firdaus is capable of openly portraying herself as a sexual being, she is seen as leaking and transgressing those boundaries, especially in an Arab culture where women's sexuality is so often policed. In other words, Firdaus's behavior is described by the men she encounters throughout the novel as, quote, polluting society, and therefore needs to be fixed or eliminated, while paradoxically taking part in it. Here, shame can be seen as an instrument of subjugation, not of reform, and that Firdaus's shaming is about maintaining male control over female sexuality and body, but rather not about social improvement, as they argue. An important instance, this is the close reading that I want to do with everybody. An important instance of shaming in the book is when Firdaus is shamed by a man named Alea after they sleep together. Lea's comment on Firdaus's professional attitude about her prostitution tells her to hang a list of prices outside of her space like a doctor. But he contrasts her profession to medical work by stating, quote, that a doctor, while carrying out his duties, he feels like he's worthy of respect. When Firdaus asks him how he feels about her, he replies, "You are not respectable." And Firdaus describes, there we go. I knew I should have done it better. Firdaus describes how before the words "not respectable" had even reached my ears, my hands rose to cover them quickly, but they penetrated into my head like the sharp tip of a plunging dagger. Here we see the patriarchal subject's displacement of shame from Alea to Firdaus. Although most men who come to Firdaus's occupation and the sexual activity with her, it is only she who is not respectable and needs to be shamed and arrested for polluting society. Firdaus replies to Lea's comment and says, "My work is not worthy of respect. Why then do you join in it with me?" And in this instance, she utilizes her voice to say what should not be said. So she was leaking sexually earlier, and now she is leaking vocally. In that she's leaking in that she's highlighting the hypocrisy and fragility of the patriarchal logic, particularly how men that she encounters want to have her absorb the shame in order to render themselves somehow immune to it. Lea's remarks leave an effect on Firdaus. She describes how words not respectable are like a hammer blow to her head, to a plunging dagger, and how this blow moves onto her body, onto her bones, and onto her surroundings. Her description of the shaming words "you are not respectable" can be seen as shame doing its deformation work. A deformation of Firdaus's mental and physical being presents an opportunity for the patriarchal subject to reform her into a respectable woman under his terms. The patriarchal subject is reasserting his boundaries in this instance to maintain this gendered hierarchy where the female body is the receptacle of shame. But Firdaus's response, "Why then do you join in it with me?" deflects this shame and introduces an anxiety for the patriarchal subject, since the female body is no longer the receptacle of shame, And if this shame is not going to the female body, where does it go? In other words, his definition as shameless is highly dependent on her definition as shameful. Although Firdaus ends up quitting her prostitution after Dia's comment for a little while, her decision to do so, in my opinion, does not necessarily indicate shame's success. It rather reflects her disappointment in allowing herself to be shamed. And in this case, her shame is not a sign of her failure, as Ahmed would describe in her studies on shame, but rather a sign of resilience. She becomes reformed in that her shattering sense of self has presented her with an opportunity to construct anew. She becomes, since shame is intensified by being seen by others as shame, Firdaus's concealment of herself while she's in prison from others, and her refusal to talk about her case and her execution of her pimp, or her killing of her pimp, allows her to refuse to portray herself as failing for the people around her. In other words, by choosing to not talk to anyone while waiting for her execution, Firdaus presents a sense of pride in killing her pimp in self-protection. The withholding of her voice presents a threat to the patriarchal structure. By rejecting the shame that the patriarchal subject wants her to acknowledge and embody, Firdaus instead comes to embody an ideal of her own, one that does not necessarily agree with one for the Arab culture, and particularly the patriarchal culture, and when they try to impose that ideal on her. Although she is confined in her prison cell, Sadawi describes Firdaus's voice as she is telling her story as, quote, penetrating the prison walls and vibrating in her head, in the cell, in the prison, in the streets, in the whole world, shaking everything, spreading fear wherever it went, the fear of the truth that kills. Firdaus's voice seems to leak despite the constant attempts to indoctrinate her, and although her voice might be bad for the patriarchal subject to hear, from Sadawi's description, it is a voice that empowers other women around her because it is leaking. So society's attempt to indoctrinate and confine Firdaus cannot prevent her from claiming her self-determination, even though the state still has ultimate power over her fate because of her crime of murder. She has taken hold of the power of granting herself honor despite society's efforts to shame her. She has manifested a form of womanhood that does not necessitate her subordination to the female or to the male subject, but rather one that allows her to embrace her leaky self. So in this instance, leakage, whether physical or vocal, becomes a learning tool that teaches us about the importance of our transgression. It allows things that are typically unspoken to become explicit or evident. It is a way for us to get out. Thank you.
We'll hold all questions till after the 3 presentations have been done. And the next one is by Grace Boulanger. She is studying the Master of Arts in English Studies, Rhetoric, and Composition with her faculty advisor, Caroline McCracken Fleischer. Grace graduated with an interdisciplinary degree and in culture, literature, and the arts, and a minor in classical studies from the University of Washington, Bothell. Her research interests include Gothic literature, oral tradition, abjection, colloquialisms, language in digital spaces, language and labor, and language as a culture shifter, academic labor, and reflection practices. Grace loves storytelling and using language as a mold. She is focusing on the rhetoric and composition track with the hope of contributing to curriculum development in writing centers. Her title is Baba Yaga Defeats Vladimir Prop, Prioritizing Relationships in Fairy and Folktale Analysis.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So this project began as an exploration actually of human remains in fairy tales and has tremendously morphed into an exploration of relationships and mobility in fairy tales, which has been quite fun for me. So thank you all for coming to listen to it. If you're walking through the forest and you hear a thunderclap in a clear sky, it's time to hope that you don't smell like dinner, because if you do, Baba Yaga will find you. Baba Yaga grinds her way over the treetops in a flying mortar and pestle. She sniffs for her dinner while she sweeps her tracks away with a gigantic broom. You're snatched up in a blink, and she takes you back to a little windowless house that prances on chicken legs. Once you are eaten, your bones lie in the roasting pan while Baba Yaga sleeps. You wait, voiceless and longing for a burial, and her servants sigh while deciding, is there any more room on the fence for your skull? According to Andreas Johns, Baba Yaga does not fit into folklore's Vladimir Prop's fairy tale morphology with ease. She slips by, spilling beyond Prop's categories and causing structural turmoil. I will argue that Baba Yaga's mobility confounds structural readings because she never occupies a single or even double dramatis personae. She is in constant flux and contraction, and so are the characters around her by association. Our test case, Vasilisa the Beautiful, demonstrates how reading folktales through relationships exposes themes existing beyond categorization. These themes, such as mobility, help us understand how the wisdom of rural women traverses the material world through story and body. Andreas Johns writes, the Baba Yaga embodies the gigantic forces of ancient paganism which govern rural Slavic communities. She remains a revered character in the oral tale tradition, which maps her into the sky and across geography. We see this happen in Vasilisa the Beautiful, where the hero Vasilisa has one of the most fleshed out encounters with Baba Yaga. In this tale, Vasilisa lives with her stepmother, a conniving woman who prioritizes her own daughter's social movement and treats Vasilisa like a servant. On an errand for her stepmother, Vasilisa visits Baba Yaga, and with the help of a magic doll given to her by her dead mother, Vasilisa completes impossible chores for Baba Yaga in exchange for a flame. To reward her, Baba Yaga gives Vasilisa a human skull with fiery coals in its eyes. When she returns home, the skull kills Vasilisa's stepfamily. This action creates structural turmoil, and Prop tries to make this fit into his categories, but he admits that it doesn't work. Baba Yaga moves around too much to be just a donor. We can see that by examining the themes produced by Baba Yaga's relationships to the hero, Prop's argument that a folktale is made up of actions is uprooted. Since folktales are built from relationships, our perspectives need to change. Baba Yaga is part of 3 relationships which produce the theme of mobility in Vasilisa the Beautiful. Mobility in the story happens in 2 ways. The first is through the material world, and the second is socially. Prop calls Baba Yaga a donor character, which is usually stationary and does a single action. But Baba Yaga moves through the material world and performs multiple actions that operate in relationships. Her relationships to the community is bound through 3 categories: to the land, the triple goddess motif, and to objects. First, Baba Yaga is tethered to the community via the material world, specifically the land where her hut sits. She may be a cannibal, but she has a day job. Prop writes that Baba Yaga guards the boundary of the other world and the entrance to it. The place her hut sits is a juncture between the topside world and the underworld. Her servants, Bright Day, Red Sun, and Black Night, use her hut to exit the topside world for the underworld. These worlds overlap. As guardian of the boundary to the underworld, Baba Yaga is intimately associated with travel and cycles. Even Vasilisa notices this on her journey. The land changes as she approaches Baba Yaga's hut. Strange knights on horseback pass her through the woods to mark the passage of dawn to evening, and the forest quiets. When Vasilisa arrives at the hut, Baba Yaga is not there. She must wait for her to return before entering the house. The relationship between Baba Yaga and the material existence of the topside world points to Baba Yaga's dominion over nature's cycles because she controls when, who, and what can enter or exit her home. She oversees maintenance and movement, which becomes an essential part of restoration. Next, the second link between Baba Yaga and mobility is through her participation in the triple goddess motif. There are 3 stages to this sequence: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. At first glance, Baba Yaga represents the crone. She is a very, very old woman with knowledge of herbs and plants and lives removed from society while practicing transgressive ways of survival, namely cannibalism. The crone is a fully initiated woman who knows what to do when trouble comes. In Vasilisa the Beautiful, the crone moves around depending on where Vasilisa needs her, but this happens for a fascinating reason. In a twist, she has been telling us the whole time that she is mobile. An etymological study of Baba Yaga reveals that Baba Yaga is not a name, but an honorific that loosely translates to grandmother witch. This means anytime Vasilisa encounters an old woman, she is meeting a Baba Yaga, which is an interpretation that slips away from Powell's categories. First, Vasilisa visits Baba Yaga the witch, and she lives with another Baba in the city. All Baba Yagas are keepers of generational wisdom, just like the witch who guards knowledge of restorative cycles. Since young women grow into old women, they take whatever knowledge they accumulate through their life into cronehood. You could argue here that all women begin their cronehood in their maidenhood. This is where we notice that Baba Yaga appears to be fixed in one sequence of the triple goddess motif, but actually represents all three and encourages movement across the stages. The transferable knowledge Babas possess allows them to move invisibly and creates a network of knowledge among women. This network creates pathways to move socially, as Vasilisa demonstrates. As Baba Yaga refuses to remain a crone, she also simply refuses to fit into Powell's categories. The maiden and mother roles are complex because they have squishy boundaries between them. Vasilisa's dead mother is mother, but also the crone because she transfers knowledge to Vasilisa by giving her a magical doll. Mother dies in the first page of the story, but because of the doll, she becomes a mobile crone. Similarly, Vasilisa is the maiden, mother, and crone all at once. Vasilisa begins the story as a maiden, grows into the mother, and at one point in the story becomes a crone because her stepfamily dies and she is absolved of caring for them. Movement through the sequence correlates to knowledge gained and family lost, but we can only see that through Baba Yaga. You can see how these stages fluctuate because we have a clear picture of Baba Yaga. As Vasilisa moves through the maiden, mother, crone stages, the landscape of the story blurs. Thankfully, it is manageable because if we read the pieces that spill outside Powell's functions in relation to Baba Yaga, for example, at the end of the story, Vasilisa gains a family member by marrying the Tsar and backtracks to the mother stage. Then the story ends. Ending the story in the middle of the triple goddess sequence means that Vasilisa could potentially restart the story cycle. She could die like her mother, she could be widowed and become a Baba Yaga through honest means. Her options indicate a cyclical movement where the story can start over or where it can be altered. The story stays potent because Vasilisa can keep moving when she is not pinned down. Baba Yaga's last relationship to people is manifested through magical objects. Prabh is successful in declaring that Baba Yaga falls into the broad category of fairy tale donors, but she still manages to slip outside of it. Baba Yaga takes a human skull with glowing eyes off of her gatepost and gives it to a little girl. The skull is linked to the hut's power and has chthonic characteristics. This means that the power it possesses are linked to the land of the dead. When we pay attention to the relationship between Baba Yaga and the land, we see that the skull is foreshadowing the fate of Vasilisa's stepfamily. After all, Baba Yaga is in charge of the entrance to the underworld, and she is sending her servant to collect. Baba Yaga uses her connection to the land of the dead to restore Vasilisa's home. However, she never leaves the hut, and this is her moment of mobility. The skull is an extension of Baba Yaga's power. She exercises this material mobility by giving Vasilisa the gruesome helper. Even though she technically murders the stepfamily, Baba Yaga's spinster and cronehood bypass the constraints of society and allows her to enact taboo solutions. In fact, as long as we consider Baba Yaga's dominion over maintaining order in nature, then her actions fall closer to restorative justice. This is another interpretation that Propp's functions cannot capture. And since Prop focuses only on actions, readers cannot interpret the story past the plot points. A lens that focuses on relationships can pinpoint motivations and can begin to see the gigantic forces that are shaping Slavic tales. If this folktale is read bereft of the valuable relationships Baba Yaga has with the other women, then we lose access to an initiation and restoration story, as well as a story about psychic development. Prop might argue that external factors cannot influence interpretation because the only thing that matters is what a character does. But this argument does not hold up because it removes the folktale from the tale tellers who created them by relegating the story to an academic inquiry rather than a living narrative about ancient community values. Since folktales are part of an embodied oral tradition, it is pertinent we pay attention to the possible ways they were influenced by the material bodies of the tale tellers. Adlynn proposes that women must write through their bodies and invent an impregnable language. There's no way to tell if Vasilisa the Beautiful was told through women's bodies, but it can be read through the bodies of women who construct a society of secret help within the story. Mother instructs Vasilisa to not show her doll to anyone, so it helps in secret. Stepmother secretly orders her daughter to snuff out the candle, and so Vasilisa has to go get a flame. Baba Yaga praises Vasilisa for not asking too many questions, because if you know too much, you'll soon get old. Consequently, Vasilisa grows up during the story. This folktale is about psychic development as much as it is about how women's bodies change and accumulate somatic wisdom. Reading this story through the secret threads that connect networks of rural women allows the story to be mapped onto everyday life and creates a living narrative. Vasilisa the Beautiful remains potent because it is built on relationships that regenerate while many folktales go dormant. Baba Yaga's material ties to rural communities show us how themes and folktales can reflect existence in the corporeal world. In a tumultuous ancient past, there's comfort through imagining an intersection of the topside world and the land of the dead. It means that the governing entities over life and death are accessible. Vasilisa the Beautiful reinforces feminine governance over natural cycles because those cycles translate into social mobility. And finally, Baba Yaga's sonic objects remind us that souvenirs hold the past and the present together by signifying what used to be and implying a new state of being that is to come. A doll represents the beginning of life, and a skull represents the leftovers, and these objects locate developmental sites of knowledge for Vasilisa. We should read Slavic stories. There we go. We should read Slavic stories using a lens focusing on relationships because it produces multidimensional characters who represent the way rural communities made sense of movement in the ancient world. Baba Yaga may challenge Vladimir Prop, but in that moment of failure, new opportunities are born. We can use Prop to answer questions of conjecture and definition if we move toward a lens attending to the material body of production to answer questions of quality. Vasilisa the Beautiful shows readers how women on the outskirts are the keys to stability in the world. Baba Yaga lives to the beat of her own, probably human skin drum, and has the most tangible freedom to move. She can travel in her flying mortar and pestle, or can be trotted around in her chicken-like house. She proves her necessity by restoring the social order of Vasilisa's home. Baba Yaga's presence should alert readers that there is more happening thematically than meets the eye. Close reading stories that include Baba Yaga for their relationships helps us discover community values and keys us into a fading past. So when we hear the thunderclap of her mortar and pestle, it is time to pay close attention to our surroundings or else be eaten.
Our next presenter is Adlynn Jamaludin. She will graduate this spring, 2022, with a master's in communication. Her faculty advisor is Dr. Katie Cooper from UW. A communications MA student, Adlynn is from a big city in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. She loves her major and tries to dip her toes in the various fields communication has to offer. She has had experiences in public relations, advertising, marketing, print media, and now she is broadcasting as a news intern with Wyoming Public Media. She has a huge interest in the entertainment industry, particularly Korean pop music or K-pop. Being an international student herself, she loves looking into cross-cultural topics. And a fun fact that Adlynn shares is that she has a talent which is that she never gets jet lagged, no matter how terrible the time differences are. So she'll keep us wide awake with her paper today. And the title is K-pop Reimagined, Bridging Distance Amid the COVID-19 Pandemic. Bridging distance amid the COVID-19 pandemic, period. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So my project, my thesis isn't a traditional paper, it's more of a project. That's what Kojo gives you to do. It's a creative project, so if you want to do your master's, Kojo. It's also part of my job, I have to promote Kojo anyway. why I got into it was obviously love K-pop. And so if I was gonna do something for the next 1 year, for the last 1 year to just like sit and like go through lots of readings and watch lots of YouTube videos and whatnot, so you better do something that you like. So K-pop it is. So essentially K-pop Reimagined is a mini documentary that I created, highlighting mostly about what K-pop did during the pandemic and how they kind of get closer with fans despite everything that happened. And so what really interested me in K-pop is because I love PR so much, public relations, marketing, all of that is something that I really like. So I always find it interesting when I see like things like how people market things or like how people communicate their product or like their selves or whatever. I find that really interesting. And that's also what I like about K-pop. Like it's not just the pretty boys with all the fancy outfits, makeups, dance moves or whatever. It's also how they market themselves. It's very different in terms of like how they do their album promotions. It's not just like a little box CD or whatever. Like you can spend like $18 and you have like books, like lots of freebies and all that. So I find the way that they market things very interesting. And especially during COVID, as early as April 26 April, which was like super early in the pandemic when things were shutting down, when people didn't know what to do, K-pop decided to come up with an online concert, which isn't just like a random performance where you sit in your living room and then just like play guitar or whatever. It's a whole production. So they make it into like they call it XR, which is sort of like a VR kind of thing. And then they actually sold tickets to it, and then like it's like an actual concert with like merchandise and everything. And so Super M did their first concert. It was like the first ever online K-pop concert, and it sold 75,000 tickets. And then despite, you might think, during the pandemic, people were like going through things like all the economies were done or whatever, they actually sold, their album sale actually increased by 40%. And then it increased again by more, 37% more last year. So what got me really into wanting to do this project was the uniqueness of the industry and the uniqueness of the fandom, which is very different. Like before this, I was a huge fan of Jonas Brothers, One Direction, Justin Bieber. Yes, I was a believer, all of that stuff. But the way that K-pop, like their fandom is totally different. And because the uniqueness of the fandom was the reason why the industry itself can be unique. And then also during COVID-19, while everyone's at home, not knowing what to do and all of that, the parasocial relationship between for fans increased. And parasocial relationship is essentially like the relationship you have with people you don't really know. So like with a celebrity, with like a character or whatever, so that increased more. And because that K-pop was able to do more than they could during the pandemic. So talking about the documentary, so essentially, like I said, it's about like how K-pop did things. They thrived and strived during the pandemic, and I did not look at it from an industry point of view. It's more a fan's point of view, and that's because we've had lots of documentaries or news coverage and all of that talks look at the industry itself. But now as a fan myself, I would really like it to hear fans' stories. Yes, they did this, but what do you think of it? We marketed it to fans, but what do fans think of it? And so that's what I focus on. And then it was really interesting how fans, whenever I talk to them, they're like, this is I really appreciate you doing this because I'm excited to hear other fans' stories. And when like I said, when you have a movie or a film or whatever talks about K-pop, it's always from the industry's point of view. So fans kind of want to know what other fans think about. And so it's around 34.4 minutes, and it's on YouTube. And so how I did this was subjects were recruited through a website that I did, where the website has all the information such as the background of all the information about the project, background for me, and then what is expected if you sign up, and then obviously the sign up form. And then once you sign up, so the sign up would actually have like questions, like a screening question where it's where I asked where they're from. And that's essentially because I want to get it like a geographically diverse. So I don't care who you are, whatever. I just want to know like where you're from, just because that affects like how you experience K-pop. So even like right now, we have lots of like, I have a friend who lives in LA and she gets to meet lots of K-pop artists. I'm just like, I can't fly out there. It's so expensive. Like even there's like a BTS concert in Vegas and my friends got like close seats to the stage, but flights are $400. So expensive. So I'm like, you know what? Like I spent $200 on the ticket, $400 on the flight, and then like $300 more on the hotel. Like that's too expensive. I'm broke. So yeah, where you are really affects your experience. So that's why I focus on like the geographic diversity of it. And then after you sign up, I would like contact you. I would send you a link to a Simply Book website, which is super convenient with scheduling. Like they will give you like you can like customize your own message. So they will like email you the Zoom link and whatever. So you don't have to do anything, which is super easy. And then because it's like a worldwide kind of project kind of thing, so I had to like cater to different time zones. So I did like the interview all throughout my winter break. So it was like from mid-November to like mid-January. I did not have a life. And then I like that because it was like very worldwide with time zones and everything. So I did like from 8 a.m. to like 11 p.m. just so people can sign up in different timings. I didn't want to barf. And then so 62 people signed up, but I only got to interview 49 people, which was still a lot because so the average time where I talked to a person, so if we just like went through the questions like exactly as it is, it'll be like 45 minutes. But most of the time when we talk, it's not an interview, it's more like a fangirling session. So obviously it goes to like 2 hours. And as much as I love talking about K-pop, like spending that amount of time is just, I literally wanted to barf because there's this one day or like a few days where like my interviews was like from 8 a.m. all the way to 11 p.m. with like only like 30 minutes break in between. And I was like, I love K-pop, but oh my God, I'm gonna like end up hating K-pop after this. I didn't though, but yeah. So I ended up with like 50 something hours of interview footage. I did in-person interviews too, which was at a concert in LA that I went, and then a fan event. And then the setting was mostly like band backgrounds, just to like visually show you like, you know, the K-pop bands. And then I ended up with 342 B-rolls, which was actually not hard to do because I watch an unhealthy amount of K-pop. So I'm like, I know where this goes from, like all of that. So yeah. So the main points of the documentary is that we kind of started off with like asking people what is K-pop to you and what got you into K-pop, because they kind of like intertwine. Because like for me, what is K-pop to me, and then they kind of like also tell you like what got them into K-pop. Which actually the first few drafts that I did was very like structured and like questions, answers, question, answers. But my super amazing professor, Dr. Katie Cooper, she was the one who like always like helped me with editing and like making it flow better. So it's more of like just a story instead of a questions, answer, questions, answer. And then the second part of it was they kind of talked about how K-pop is very different from Western genres in a way that, like I said, like some people even mentioned that they were fans of Justin Bieber and like other Western artists, but the way that K-pop cater to fans are like totally different, because it's more so with K-pop, the K-pop fandom, it's a three-way relationship. It's fan to artist, artist to fan, and also fan to fan. And because of those relationships, it's like very different with Western genres. And also K-pop gives a lot of content. It's because they always want to give to their fans. So they have like, they also become like music show hosts, they're radio DJs, they're ambassadors for like skincare, fashion and all of that, they're models. they even have like sports day, which is a huge event for like the K-pop industry, where they have like all these idols, or like we call artists idols. They have these idols like grouped together, and then they just like compete against each other, which is super fun. And then, like I said, like they have various of content. So variety show, reality show, all of that. Like they just want to give everything. Which someone actually mentioned that because they give out so many contents, they feel like they're closer to the artists because you can see all these different sides of them. Unlike Western artists, where it's more of just like performances, and if they don't have a performance, or like I guess like Adele, like she went on a hiatus, all you can fall back to is like old concert videos. So, and then the other thing is that it's a two-way street with K-pop. And so the cafes is that sometimes they would have these like special events where they become baristas or they cook for the fans, which is really nice. There's this one group called Blackpink. When they moved to a new house, as a housewarming gift, they actually cooked for the fans and like make little like lunch boxes and give it out to the fans as like their gift to the fans, which is really nice. And then like Wish, they will like grant wishes. So whenever they go out on like variety shows or talk shows, they would ask fans like, what do you want to see from us? Or like, what kind of questions do you want to know? Like, whatever kind of like talent show or whatever do you want to see from us? So they would always ask fans like what you want, because we are the target audience. So, and then this is one example that I showed in my documentary, where this group ATs, for 3 albums in a row, they asked fans like what songs should be their title track. So they would have like 2 songs and then like 2 like music video shot, and then they would like give a snippet of like 30 seconds or something. And they're like, which song should we like promote and like be like our #1 track or whatever and all that. So K-pop does a lot of these things where they include fans in whatever they do. And then obviously it's a music industry, so physical concerts are a huge thing in K-pop. And then so fans mentioned how obviously the first thing you would see is like their appearances, how they sing, dance, all those like fireworks and all of that. But also concerts and for K-pop is totally different. They're very heavily fan participated. So for this one is an example of a like banner. It's a fan project. So before going to that, every time you go to a fan concert, you will always have people handing out things. So even if you don't have tickets to the concert, you can just go to the venue early in the morning and you'll go back with like 2 bags full of just goodies, because they would just like give out lots of things. And then so for this one, it's more of like a fan project kind of thing, where they would like print banners, and then during a certain song, you just like hand it out, and then it's like a surprise to those who are performing. And then it's just nice to see how like one person, sometimes it's just one person, sometimes it's a group of like fangirls or fanboys that would just like give out these things. Like it's not from the company, from the artist or whatever, it's like from fans to like give back to the artist, because yay, like you're doing all these performances for us, so here's our gift to you. And then sometimes during birthdays, this is during the concert in LA. It was a BTS concert, and it happened to be one of their members' birthday. So they did a surprise birthday event where they held out like his name on the heart, and then they like sang happy birthday together, which was really nice. It made them look like a collective. And then one other thing that's like super big in K-pop is their light sticks. So they're not just like those little glow sticks or whatever. They're like very, like every group has a different one. Kind of like reflects the group, and then they're crazy expensive, but I have a few of them. I don't eat for these. So what's really cool about it is that they have like Bluetooth capabilities, where in the venue, like the person who's in charge can like change like the colors in the concert. So like if the song calls for like a red kind of vibe, so like the concert turns red. For this one, it's like green, and then you can also like change it to like different wordings, or like you can actually make it move and stuff. So that's really cool. That's also like the really fun part of concerts. Like when you go to a K-pop concert, you have to buy light sticks. But yes, I totally understand when I first got into K-pop,
my friend was talking about like buying light sticks for like $50 or something. And I was like, what? Because my idea of light stick is just like those glow sticks. And like, why is a glow stick $50? And then when I met her at the concert, she was like, this is the light stick. And I was like, it's just a stick. Why is it $50? And then when I went into the concert, I was like, right, cool. Definitely need to buy that. So yeah. Yeah, and then after that, we kind of transitioned into what happened during COVID. People were talking about how they didn't have anything to do, and then when they turn on TV, it's mostly like sad stories about like death tolls and all of that. So they kind of just like take some time off to just like watch K-pop, and there's like abundance of content like you can watch from like even if it's not new things, it's their old things. But even during COVID, like they came out with so many different contents just to keep fans occupied because yeah, they can't go on tour and stuff like that. So that's their way of like doing that. And then so physical concerts turned to online concerts, where so the one on the right, like I said, they have like some XR stuff. So it's like that's like just a screen, but they made it like I don't know, it's insane. So like $30 spending on online concerts worth it. And then so the one on the left just kind of shows like so during online concerts they kind of have like all these like little like Zoom where you can like sign like be at the concert with them. So it's like you can see them and they can see you. And then they also have like so like the little banner thing. It also goes into online concerts where you know you can like cheer them in silent with their banners. And then sometimes they also make it very like fan participation type where they would play games with the audience and like choose O for this, choose X for this, and then you can like kind of show it. So that's really fun. And sometimes they also like would choose random fans to like show up on the screen, like talk to them, or they would have like a fan project where like you can submit your dance videos or whatever, and they can like put it in and surprise the artist, which is really, really nice. And then fan sign. Why did it crash? Okay. So another thing in K-pop that's really big is fan signs. Fan signs are like when you like get to like meet the idols, the artists, and like talk to them one-on-one and all that. And so obviously when COVID happened, they weren't allowed to do that, which is really sad because it's like the biggest part of K-pop because like that's when you like personally can talk to them, ask them weird questions, you can see them in a different light. You can talk to them as if they're your friends and all of that.
It isn't.
All right. No, I might just not put it on.
Okay.
And so obviously they turned to online fan signs where it's more of a like a video call thing where everyone from all around the world can participate. It's like you get to FaceTime your favorite idols for like 30 seconds, 3 minutes. And then just like do whatever, which is, it makes it more accessible because with the physical fan signs, you can't really do that because it's usually only in China, Japan, and Korea. And so fans from the US, for example, like can't really just hop on a plane and go for a fan sign. So online fan signs made it more accessible. And I talked to fans who like did this, and then she was like, if it weren't for like it being online, it's not going to be like a thing that she would like think about of joining. And then she got to like talk to like her favorite idols, which is really nice. So, and then yeah, fan participation is like really huge in K-pop, and it's not really like a COVID thing, but it's like a thing that just keeps happening, and then it got bigger during COVID because of how global K-pop has become. So they have like more fans joining.
And so in the K-pop culture, votings and streams are like super huge. So when you release a new album, you only get like 2 to 5 weeks to promote it. And during those time, you go to it's like a weekly MTV Music Award kind of thing where you have to like go and like it's in a week there's like 5 of those, so you have to keep like showcasing your stuff, and then fans will like vote like crazy to make sure like their idols win, because every week only one person gets the prize or whatever. So again, it's like giving a gift to the idols. And then translations, obviously they would speak Korean, and then so we would have fans that would translate this, and this is more like a giving to other fans. So like it's a fan to fan kind of thing, to like help other fans understand. And then social justice is more of like they would like do something in the name of K-pop for social justice. For example, last year we had a huge flood in Malaysia. That's where I'm from, and the government was slow at getting things done, and so the K-pop fandom back home kind of like collected like donations, money, like all those like essentials and whatever, and like donated to people who need them, and in the name of like this kind of K-pop group or whatever. And then billboards, if you ever go to Korea, their face will be like all over. They would like this, like if you see them, like they're not from the companies themselves, it's from fans. They will like donate it just to like make sure, like, you know, just to like celebrate it, someone's birthday or like their anniversary or whatever. And then it's also a norm now, it's like everywhere in New York. I went to LA and it was in LA and it was like, whoa, this is like interesting. Like it's like K-pop is huge now, like it's even in the billboards in Times Square and all of that. And then birthday projects is when fans will like collect money and buy gifts for K-pop idols. And then it's like buying your favorite person a birthday present and then just like giving it to them. And then you can see them wear it when they like perform or whatever, which is really nice. And then last but not least is the dance community in K-pop, where it's mostly like fans would dance, like do dance covers, but they make it like a huge music video production, where I actually put it in my like documentary. And then during our editing session, my professor was like, is that an actual documentary? Is that an actual music video? I was like, no, it's like fan made. And like, whoa, that's like a whole different level. And then so I think K-pop now like acknowledges that too, because they also like every time they promote something, they're like, send in your dance videos, and then like it's a whole competition and all that. So that's really nice. And then Cup Sleeve events, it's a fan event where, so you know how you go to like a coffee shop and you have those sleeves? So they kind of like made it into like customize it to like K-pop version of it. And someone asked me if it's like the companies pay for it. Like, no, it's also a fan made. They will like spend hundreds or like thousands of dollars just to like give to other fans. So they made these with all like freebies and stuff, where all you have to do essentially is just go to a cafe, buy a drink, and you get all those freebies, and you can just mingle around with fans. And then in the documentary, someone like people said that how K-pop is obviously like a taboo. Like people are like, ew, you like Korean man? Like, why do you like K-pop? All of that. But when you go to Cup Sleeve events, they're like, oh my God, like I can do whatever I want, and I would like, you know, I would be surrounded with my people. So that was really nice. And then another thing is that V-Lives is like a streaming platform for K-pop, where they kind of like, they always stream what they do like in their everyday lives. It's a thing before COVID, but since they weren't allowed to go out as well during COVID, they use it more to just like show their everyday life thing. So for this one, it was more like 24-hour relay kind of thing, and since they wanted to go camping, but they can't, so here they are. And then so in conclusion, I'm just trying to like rapid fire. In conclusion, like towards the end, people were saying like they're thankful that K-pop has done this, like all of these efforts that they made, and it's like they realize that K-pop is more global, and they hope that K-pop still continue doing what they're doing even after the pandemic has happened, because before this they feel like Korean fans are more favored because they're in Korea, and it feels like they're looking into their world instead of being together. And now that K-pop is going global, like even with online concerts,
even if physical concerts right now that are happening, they would also include like online options for global fans who can't attend. So they feel like it's a nice effort that hip hop's doing. So it's just gonna be like a minute-ish. I'm gonna just show you what the documentary is.
Despite lockdown or whatever. Artists increased their use of the video streaming platform VLive to share their daily lives and struggles with fans. Artists hold live chat sessions broadcasting from waiting rooms, cars, and their homes. During these sessions, they often engage in activities such as arts and crafts, baking, or coffee making. K-pop artists' frequent engagement through various forms of media creates a sense of intimacy and strengthens their bonds with fans.
If you see like Bono's live, he's literally in his pajamas. What's a more intimate instance that you in your pajamas, laying on a couch, watching your phone, looking at your phone while answering your questions to your fans? You know, there's like fan chan who gives you chat rooms.
As I've always said, come here, look for me, ask me, talk with me, and I'll try my best to relieve your stress if I can help, okay? So
I'm still very surprised when, you know, idols address topics that were always perceived as taboos, you know, stigmas, like you can't talk about it. Like periods, girls, love, no, we don't talk about these type of things.
for those people who are on that date, it's always good to keep your stomach warm. Have some sweets, get some chocolate, watch a movie, and I hope that helps with the pain going away.
I feel like they've gotten more comfortable, like talking about problems in their lives because of like the pandemic. Like they've gotten a lot more vulnerable, I feel like, which is interesting because I feel like a lot of like idols like have to uphold this image of like being perfect and like happy and having a great life.
Especially like when they have more freedom to express what they want.
You still know how they are and you still see their condition. You know, they can still talk to you, send you messages when they want.
It's like getting to know them more because they show more about their life.
팬분들과 대화를 하면은 우리 복 빼잖아요, 직접. 근데 이걸 하면은 뭔가 같이 있는 느낌이.
So that's all of it. If you want to watch the documentary, here's the code. Also, please leave a comment if you are. But if you can't scan this, I also have like a little card or whatever. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Make sure that each presenter gets to answer one question. And then you can continue the questioning during the break because we do need to move on to the next panel. So is there a question for Dala Bima's presentation? Does anyone? They can come back down or they can answer from where they are. Yeah, come back down.
It's easier to hear on Zoom.
Is it okay?
Yeah, so if they send questions.
So yeah, these are our three presenters. Remember, this was the literary genre segment where we had a novel, a folklorist, and lyrics. So does anyone have a question for Dala Bima?
I have a question for all three of you.
Okay, that's fine. Well, let's use the same question and all three can answer.
Well, I was just really interested, Dala, in the way you started us thinking about leakiness, right? And how leakiness perhaps can be embraced to be strategic. And it seemed, Grace, as if you were talking about the same thing ultimately. And similarly, Adlynn, but in different circumstances, right? Leakiness between Maiden, Mother Crow, etc., and then leakiness between fans and the K-pop artists. And I wondered if you could just talk about that interesting phenomenon that seems to be something we can increasingly recognize, that categories are not closed off from one another.
Sure, yeah. I feel like in all of my, so I'm currently working on my thesis, and all 3 chapters always come back to this idea of transgression, how transgression doesn't have to be something bad. So I think, yeah, in Grace's like storytelling style, from like history, but also like fairy tale, but also experiences, and then from Adlynn's kind of the lines between like what an artist should do versus what a fan is capable of doing. I think a lot of times like we learn about how staying within circles sometimes is comfortable, but a lot happens outside of these lines. And I feel like I learned a lot about just our capability of kind of like understanding why those lines are created, and through leakiness is when you understand why they are there and what is the function for them.
I was thinking about leakiness as Dala was speaking and how it related to the maiden mother crowd, because the more and more I thought about it and how the boundaries between those 3 sequences are very squishy and how they do fluctuate, I thought more and more about how crownhood, beginning in maidenhood, really begins with the idea that every piece of knowledge that you accumulate is translated to the next sequence. And so you always carry them with you. So you are never without crownhood, and then the crownhood is never without maidenhood. And so I did begin to, I was thinking about what you were speaking. I loved it.
I guess for me, it's like, I feel like people are not realizing that not only K-pop, but music, any music genre, they can create identities. And that's something that people should acknowledge. Like, yes, I love K-pop, but that does not make me like, oh, that obsessive, like Korean loving person. Like it creates an identity where when I talk to some people, they feel like it's a huge part of their identity in terms of like it helped them getting through hard times and all of that. So I feel like for me, like just realizing that, you know, like liking a sports group or whatever, like liking anything is the same as liking a specific music genre. Like it can, like it's when the artist creates music, they are telling a story. They're trying to like tell fans or like their listeners something. And then so it's when we listen to them, it makes us feel something and probably like change something about us, or like, and when we're just part of a community, because that's what people, like the people I talk to, they think K-pop is not just music genre, it's a whole community. And so for them, like, you know, just acknowledge that it makes people who they are.
We thank our panel for presenting today. I hope you'll continue thinking about these topics and visit with them during the break. We're going to just take 5 minutes to switch over to the next panel. So thank you very much, presenters, and thank you all for coming.
All right, so I know you've probably heard this from others before, but we do thank you for being here and for your interest in the various ways that the University of Wyoming, our community, our students, our scholars, and members of our global community who sometimes go unrecognized interact in numerous ways to bring Wyoming to the world and the world of Wyoming. We're celebrating that through this year's Wyoming Goes Global. And so I, Sean Bunning from the Center for Global Studies, am happy to have the opportunity to help facilitate this second of our student panels discussing their research. So this afternoon in this panel session, we will be hearing from Mina Moscatelli and also from Alea Denny. Please correct me if I mispronounce the name. Alea, thank you very much. And Janie Marino on all of their various research topics. So first, we'll take them sequentially, and as in the first panel, we'll go through each of the presentations first, and then invite them all up to have a joint Q&A session at the end. And I think that will allow us to make sure that we allocate enough time for each of the presentations fully within the time allotted. So first, Mina Moscatelli, a master's candidate in international studies, who actually is submitting her thesis also today.
Well, not defending, but it is due.
Submitting. Is going to be telling us a little bit about her research, which also, I should mention, received support through the Center for Global Studies International Research Grant. which are available for any of you considering an international research project in the future. Please do remember that and come see us, any of us at CGS, if you have an interest. But Mina's research in Ecuador focused on learning from livelihoods, which was sort of a human geography kind of, I may be misrepresenting it, but an interview-based look at how smallholder interaction with bamboo, naturally growing bamboo stands in the coastal areas of Ecuador, how those are helping to, being transformed by and helping to shape a burgeoning market in Ecuador that intersects with the global market for bamboo in interesting ways. And I don't know the final thrust of your research, so I won't venture further. But without further ado, Mina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks to the few of you that have stuck around. My project is titled Learning from Livelihoods, Bamboo and Coastal Ecuadorian Smallholders. And as Sean said, this is based on my master's thesis research in international studies. So to give somewhat of a background, bamboo has over 1,000 different species and it's used for a ton of different things, anything from paper to bicycles to construction, even food in some cases. So with that, the bamboo market has been expanding in recent years and promoting social and environmental sustainability. So with that, they have turned their focus to Ecuador, and there's Ecuador on the top map. And I focus my research in Manabi specifically, which is that coastal region in red on the second map, for the reason that naturally growing Guadua bamboo is found in that area. And this is a very valuable bamboo because of its characteristics of being strong, woody, timber-like, and also for the fact that it has perfect climatic conditions for the growth of bamboo and access to global trade routes being on the coast. And it should also be noted that Manabi is a region with very high poverty levels, just something to consider, keep in mind. And then my participant focus was coastal Ecuadorian smallholders or small landowners, for the reason that Guadua bamboo is largely found on their rural smallholder properties. And this group is also a historically vulnerable, marginalized, and exploited population, especially when it comes to natural resource markets in Latin America and Ecuador. So my three research questions. One is, what role and value does bamboo have in smallholder livelihoods? Two, how is bamboo and its production process understood and practiced by smallholders? And three, do these local practices surrounding bamboo and the production process support social and environmental sustainability, and why or why not might that be? My research is informed by the field of political ecology, which engages with a lot of different disciplines. And under that umbrella of political ecology, I focus on the literatures of political economy and cultural geography. Political economy focusing on, again, that long international economic dependency and vulnerability tied to natural resource markets. And then cultural geography really provides a framework for exploring bamboo, smallholders, and their relationship within the landscape of Manabi. I did an exploratory case study research design because this is an area that does not have a lot of research. I spent 4 weeks in Manabi from mid-November through mid-December of 2021, so pretty recently. And I used qualitative methods to answer my research questions. I conducted 11 semi-structured interviews with smallholders, and I supplemented these interviews with participant observation and field notes. So to jump right into some of my findings, in terms of the role and value of bamboo for smallholders, it is extremely important. It's used to meet livelihood needs in terms of building homes, livestock structures, a number of other different structures and tools that support agricultural development. As Victor, one of my participants who was a male farmer in his mid-50s, he said, I have bamboo here for anything I need. So
This really encapsulates how important bamboo is for these smallholders. Bamboo is also closely connected to coastal Ecuadorian history, culture, and identity. It's been used for centuries in this area, and the knowledge about bamboo has been passed down from different generations. And things like this bamboo house or casa de caña is characteristic of the rural campesino or farmer identity. Economically, I found that bamboo is not exceedingly important to smallholders. A lot of them rather saw it as a gift or a regalo that could be shared with community members, friends, and family as needed. It could be argued, however, that bamboo has indirect economic benefits because it's used as a, quote, free resource that can be used to provide income or support the things that are providing smallholders with income, such as those livestock shelters and agricultural tools. The production practices, managing bamboo, what I mean by this is what is done to the bamboo plant while it is still in the ground. Smallholders typically clear off the sides and branches, and they also clean out the undergrowth of the plant. And these practices are done to both keep the plant in good shape for its health as it grows, as well as after it's harvested. And then another really interesting thing that we found is that clearing that undergrowth protects smallholders from deadly snakes. There's a snake called the Ekis that likes to curl up in the humid undergrowth of the bamboo plant. And if bitten by one, there's a really high chance that you will die, especially in these rural areas so far from medical services. As far as harvesting bamboo, and what I mean by this is what is done to the bamboo to remove it from the ground, and some of those things after the fact. Bamboo is only harvested con la luna, or with the moon, or during the menguante, which is a waning moon or ebbing tide in the early hours of the morning. And they were very certain about this. They said that it's the only way that the plant won't dry out or get damaged or die. And as you can see here, this is a picture of a machete and the bamboo being cut at an angle. There was some variation in what tools were used and at what angles and distances the bamboo was cut. But generally, these practices, again, were to maintain the health of the plant and keep it healthy for a long time to come. Generational knowledge, as I kind of touched on, all these practices are learned from family members at a very young age, typically, and passed down, of course, that way. As far as the sale of bamboo, whether my participants sold their bamboo really varied. A lot of them didn't sell it, some of them sold it as needed, and only one participant sold it regularly. Most of them did not consider selling it because the price was so low. It averaged at about $1.50 for a 6-meter piece of bamboo. And for a lot of them, in order to make any significant amount of money, it was absolutely not worth it to be cutting down large amounts of bamboo for such a low price. And then sustainability, and how I've defined sustainability is the ability for humans to achieve adequate and decent livelihoods within a particular socioeconomic context, while also maintaining ecological health and diversity for the future. So I found that bamboo was socially and environmentally sustainable, especially as used by these populations. Bamboo is a respected resource, and it was absolutely treated as such. And as mentioned, it provided indirect and in some cases direct economic benefits, as well as allowed smallholders to achieve livelihood needs. It's also being used in new transformative ways in different community projects. One project is community gardens that employ elderly smallholders that might want to be getting involved in the community and also having some form of income, especially at older ages. So this is a picture of what a community garden might look like. They're using the different natural containers that form in the bamboo to plant different garden plants. There is also community projects that help women with artisanal
different artisanal projects such as building lamps with bamboo. So with that, I found too that small scale use really minimizes environmental damages. As I've said, it's maintained and harvested in a calculated way, and the importance of water cannot be understated. It was mentioned by every person I talked to. So with that, also the animal habitat, smallholders recognize how important these bamboo systems are for the larger ecosystem. So with that, natural diversity is protected in this way. There was some evidence of less sustainable practices being used by others in the community, not my participants, but clear cutting was being done, usually to clear land for pasture or monocrop culture. And this was hugely damaging to the environment, especially again, in terms of water, but participants talked about how you'd have to dig wells much deeper, and your agriculture and your livestock would all suffer from that. So with that, it's difficult to say what larger scale production will mean for social and environmental sustainability as the bamboo market expands. Just a few points of significance. Smallholders have a lot of local knowledge and expertise around bamboo, and I argue that that should be integrated into what is mostly scientific-based literature at this point, as well as within the development of bamboo. Smallholders have a lot at stake as the bamboo market expands. As I've gone over, it has an essential role in their livelihoods, and this population has experienced perpetuated vulnerability. So really, my project sought out to understand the reality of bamboo on the ground in Montague for smallholders, especially before the coming of this bamboo boom that is ultimately going to hit. And the hope is that the bamboo market does not follow in the footsteps of other natural resource markets that have come before it in Latin America and Ecuador. And that is it. Thank you.
Our next presenter, Alea Denny, is going to be speaking to us about her research on Icelandic language with the paper titled The Language of Fire and Ice, a linguistic and cultural analysis of the Icelandic language, examining the ways in which the Icelandic language both helps to perpetuate Iceland's traditional culture, but also how it's evolved over time and reflects a vibrant and current and contemporary culture. So, do you need a few more minutes to float up, or you're good?
Just a moment to see where it got saved to.
Okay. So in this talk, we'll also be learning not only about the evolution, but also some of the structure and contemporary context for Icelandic. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Alea.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this presentation is centered around my really strong interest in linguistics and also study abroad, of which I actually work in the study abroad office. So this is something that means a lot to me. It's something I'm really passionate about. And I had the chance to actually study abroad in Iceland over the summer with one of our UW faculty directed programs, which was Viking Economics, and we traveled all around the country. So this presentation will be filled with pictures that I took myself while I was studying abroad over there. So I hope it gives you kind of a more personal exposure to what it's like to experience the Icelandic language if you haven't been able to visit the country yet. All right, let's see. So just as an overview, I will be going over language purity, North Germanic languages, linguistic features, as well as Icelandic sagas in Old Norse, all of which come together to give a really strong image of how the Icelandic language is relevant for the Icelandic identity today. Above me, you'll see some really cool pictures. This really pretty babbling brook. This is above the Skogafoss waterfall. It's a very popular waterfall. There's like beautiful rainbows, all sorts of cool stuff. I have a better picture of that a little bit later in the presentation. And then next to that, I have the Parliamentary House in Reykjavik. This was during the summer, so you can tell it's very sunny out, which was pleasant. It's kind of Laramie weather over there, I would say, so a little bit breezy, but I mean, wasn't hurricane force like this week, so that was really awesome. And then this other picture that I've added on is Verur Geyser Basin in Verur National Park. And this is actually the inspiration for Mordor if you are a Lord of the Rings fan.
All right, so let's get started. Just over 500 miles northwest of Scotland lies Iceland, the famous country of ice and fire. Hosting a population of about 366,430 people, Iceland has a population that is markedly smaller than that of even the entirety of Wyoming, America's least populated state, as you probably know. Despite this relatively small national population, the official language of Icelandic thrives in its namesake motherland. The Icelandic language, while it's limited in scope of international speakers, boasts a uniquely pure vocabulary, a North Germanic evolution, and holds an extremely important role in historic and cultural preservation. With an estimated 350,000 speakers of Icelandic, of which only 15,000 live outside of Iceland in countries such as Denmark, America, and Canada, Icelandic is very closely tied to the Icelandic nationality and ancestry, as unlike some other notable languages, there is limited interest in those with no Icelandic affiliation to learn the language. Due to this relative exclusivity, Icelandic is also one of the purest languages in the world, as there is little foreign influence on the language and little to no dialectal variances or accents, unlike here in the United States where you might have the Southern accent, the Midwestern accent, a California surfer accent, anything like that. This is in part due to the isolated nature of Iceland and extensive preservation efforts, not unlike those undertaken by the Académie Française over in France for the preservation of French. Interestingly, despite this widespread and continually increasing globalization of our world, which can cause foreign loanwords to come into different languages, Icelanders are still able to utilize old words and apply a new meaning to them to reflect modernity and keep the language free from foreign influence. For example, the word for computer is tölva. It is a combination of two different words. It is tala, which is number, and also vilva, which is prophetess. So there are some foreign words that creep into the language, but overall it is still largely free from those words that don't originate within the Icelandic lexicon. This mode of recycling can help to preserve cultural integrity and breathe new life by introducing creative new ways to use the language, similar to Mandarin and how compound words are used to form an expanded vocabulary for those speakers. Icelandic also does not traditionally use every letter in the Latin alphabet, including C, Q, W, and Z. Those have been largely phased out, with the exception of some things you might be reading on blogs, like someone was talking about like a zebra on their wildlife watching blog. Obviously, there might be a Z in that, but this demonstrates its singularity, and this preservation carries on in other modes as well. Importantly, in compulsory education, children learn English or Danish, or Scandinavian, or not Scandinavian, Norwegian or Swedish in other cases instead of Danish, and those who continue into upper secondary schooling add at least one other language, usually German, French, or Spanish. This has led to a highly educated and multilingual population. By establishing Icelandic as the primary language and foremost language of education, Icelandic speakers ensure that future generations will grow up speaking their language. As Icelandic is rather similar to Faroese or Norwegian, it is also a good gateway to understanding other Scandinavian languages, and vice versa. Icelandic is also highly necessary to navigate all parts of Iceland smoothly, as although there is lots of bilingual signage all over the country, once you get into the more rural interior, there is a lot more focus on exclusively Icelandic signage, exclusively Icelandic speaking locals, that type of thing. Due to the extreme remoteness also of these inner areas, since the majority of the population is concentrated on the coast, you'll find that there is almost a language disparity in that bilingualism I was talking about due to the educated population and the number of languages that they teach in schools. All right. Iceland itself might draw to mind comparisons to other Nordic nations, such as the similar jagged beauty and fjords of Norway. Like the countries themselves, Icelandic and Norwegian both come from the North Germanic language family. Stemming from Old Scandinavian, North Germanic gave rise to Icelandic, Faroese, Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish. Evolving into Old Norse during the Viking era, which is still fairly understandable to Icelandic speakers to this day, North Germanic is marked by noted Scandinavian features. Some examples of characteristics of North Germanic as opposed to West Germanic or East Germanic include that in North Germanic languages, there are special symbols employed to represent umulated vowels. Consider the A in the word Malmo, the Swedish town, or such as O in Balker, if you have any experience in Norwegian for any reason. It looks like an O with a little stripe through it. That's an umulated vowel. So another example of pronunciation differences would also be the case of J equals Y, such as in the word fjord, spelled F-J-O-R-D. You pronounce that fjord instead of fjord. Sounds a little clunky if you pronounce it like that anyways. In Icelandic, you also include stress on the first syllable of any word compared to other North Germanic languages, where you put stress on the end of the word, interestingly. Due to these linguistic similarities in relation, amongst others, the North Germanic languages have a fair degree of mutual intelligibility, especially with Icelandic, Faroese, and Norwegian all being from the same North Germanic branch. While the writing styles are each relatively distinct because of differing vowels and accents, audibly the connections are slightly more apparent. So above me, we have a picture of the Icelandic alphabet. You can tell the consonants. There's a couple of pronunciation notes if you're curious about that. There's 32 letters. You have the diphthongs, which I will be talking about, all sorts of cool stuff. And then over here to the side, we have a picture from a roadside memorial that we stopped by while we were in Iceland for a snowplow driver, I believe it was. Forgot to record the exact translation of the sign, but you can tell that it is entirely in Icelandic, speaking to how that signage of English and Icelandic changes to exclusively Icelandic the more rural that you get in the country. The Icelandic language itself includes 32 letters in its alphabet, and 16 of them are vowels or diphthongs. A diphthong is defined as a gliding monosyllabic speech sound, such as the vowel combination at the end of toy, that starts at or near the articulatory position for one vowel and moves towards the position of another. For example, I have this noted up here that looks like house, but that is actually the Icelandic word for autumn, which is heist. So the AU in heist, that is the diphthong that you're hearing. And so when it combines like that, it changes it. There's a different pronunciation. It's kind of like, I guess, something that's built into like the integral understanding of like how the language sounds itself. It's a phonetic feature. So when you hear somebody speaking English, it might sound kind of choppy if you're European actually, or rather nasally also. With other languages like Spanish or French or Italian, it sounds a little bit more flowing. Same with Icelandic, it might sound a little bit rockier. And I like to think that that reflects the mountains that are in the country also. Since some Icelandic sounds don't exist in standard English, it can be challenging to pronounce for certain foreigners. Towards the phonetic structure, again, most of the pronunciation comes from the back of the mouth and the throat as compared to the front of the mouth for English. However, with the exception of certain letters, English speakers can still read a reasonable portion of the Icelandic language, as it is based off of the Latin alphabet, as you can tell, the exceptions of the fa sound right here, as in for, and some other stuff like that. So the development, evolution, and proliferation of the Icelandic language provides the necessary context to further understand the intrinsic societal impact of the Icelandic language as a vital cultural vessel. As a country boasting about a 99% literacy rate, the Icelandic language is tightly tied to the education at large, as I mentioned, sensibly in the fields of reading and writing, as Iceland is also noted for the book-loving populations, and the most common gift to give at Christmas is a book. Iceland was originally settled in the 9th century by Norse settlers, the famous Vikings of Holwill. One of the most notable and lasting contributions of the Vikings were their famous sagas. Sagas such as Ale Saga, Hrafnkel Saga, Red Saga, and more captured the blended history and mythologies of these ancient Icelanders, offering detailed genealogies, accounts of conflict, recordings of legal proceedings that are still treasured today for the way they capture Icelandic history with beautiful, simple prose and a fair amount of accurate information. Many native Icelanders today are able to trace their family back into the genealogies and family trees included in these sagas. Ale Saga, one of the most famous sagas, follows the story of Ale Skallagrimsson. Ale Saga encompasses many generations of the Skallagrimsson family, from Ale's grandfather's time in Norway to him moving to Iceland, to Ale's time in Iceland, to him trying to get land in Norway, and to Ale's son having adventures just all over the place, going wherever he dang well wanted to. It is believed that Snorri Sturluson wrote Ale Saga. While the sagas are by no means totally accurate, they are an important source of genealogical information, like I mentioned, as well as relevant lessons about life and morals. These sagas were originally written in Old Norse, one of the North Germanic predecessors to modern Icelandic, which is still understandable to modern Icelandic speakers. This allows Icelandic speakers to be able to read the sagas in their original Norse form, meaning that means that much less will be lost in the process of translation, such as to another language like English or Spanish. In a study conducted by researchers from the University of Iceland, it was found that after teaching the Ledixla saga to 14 to 15-year-old students, they improved their comprehension of moral vocabulary. In the parts of the test that measured knowledge about the meaning of words that describe moral virtues and vices, there was a statistically significant improvement from the first to the second test. The eta squared value of the distribution indicated that this improvement was partially due to the intervention. The interviews with the teachers and the focus groups support this result. This study was conducted in an effort to address what was seen as a national shortcoming on morals after the critical Icelandic economic crash of 2008, as a special investigating commission formed by the Icelandic parliament saw a deep-seated lack of ethical structures in Icelandic society as significantly contributing to the crisis, which then led to new efforts to teach ethics, critical thinkings, and morals in schools from elementary through university. That the study conducted shows a connection between moral vocabulary expansion and reading the Icelandic sagas speaks to the larger idea that Icelandic history and Old Norse can help to develop a stronger understanding of ideas, such as that of right versus wrong, and cultural norms and morals. This illustrates the knowledge that is kept safe by the gates of Old Norse or Icelandic. Old Norse texts also include applications for modern research too, including the Icelandic Saga Map Project. The comprehensive and far-reaching ways that the sagas are rooted in local landscapes make them a perfect body of text to use to explore the possibilities that digital mapping offers, because mapping stands methodologically somewhere between that which has been called literary cartography on one hand, such as the mapping of fictional places, like making a map of Middle Earth, making a map of Westeros, stuff like that, and historical GIS cartographic practices on the other, since places with the same names as those mentioned in the sagas can be found in Iceland today. Historic locations such as the Vikings parliamentary home at the Althing, which is pictured above, Althing National Park, super beautiful. It's actually on the continental divide, which is super interesting. So it was seen as kind of the combination of all the worlds. So you have the underworld, overworld, the human world. They were all coming together at that continental divide. So that's why it was kind of a very historically significant place to hold the annual meetings of these groups to discuss, what is going down in the Viking settlements all around our country. Other locations that are mentioned include Lake Mývatn, which is well noted for their horrible swarms of gnats that we had to pull masks over our entire face to avoid breathing in, as well as the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, are all explicitly described in the sagas and contribute to real-world contextual understandings of Iceland's saga history for both interested travelers and Icelanders seeking to connect with their ancestors' homes and lands. Additionally, the Icelandic saga map is a tool to enable specialists and non-specialists alike to read the Icelandic saga from a spatial perspective to visualize how and where around Iceland the events described in the sagas unfold. It links the saga narratives to the landscape in which their action is set. Providing real-world context and locations for these tales can also help to identify areas of archaeological interest or anthropological relevance. This can be likened to American Civil War battle reenactments at historical locations such as Antietam or Vicksburg as a way to help visitors fully understand the gravitas of the history that has happened on the land that they stand on. Keeping the memory and stories contained within the sagas alive shows how the Icelandic language is a vital tool for historical preservation. With its North Germanic roots and limited sphere of use, the Icelandic language is a unique case study in European languages. Its select group of speakers can trace the language back to Proto-Germanic and Old Norse, the latter of which Icelandic speakers are able to read with a fair degree of ease. Including certain unique letters such as Icelandic's diphthongs and vowels, Icelandic sets itself apart from other North Germanic languages. Icelandic's relevance as a preserver of history is also quite important. The Icelandic sagas are still used to this day to identify genealogies, teach moral and ethical lessons, and identify historically significant areas. While assessing the language's multiple spheres of use, Icelandic is a beautifully curious language with a rich, culturally connected history. And then I'd just like to give a quick shout out to Anna Alexander and Sarah Robinson, who are the faculty leaders for my study abroad trip, as well as Professor Suzanne Stadelbauer from Intro to Linguistic Anthropology, which is the class I actually wrote the extended version of this presentation for.
And our third and final member of the panel this afternoon is Janie Marino, who will be talking to us a little bit about a research project that she has done on Primo Levi, entitled Primo Levi at Home and in Auschwitz. And Primo Levi is a survivor of the Holocaust from Auschwitz. In his literary works, has talked a lot about the themes of home and also being extracted from home. And so we're going to learn a little bit about how he's discussed that theme and what its importance is for us to take away. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so I'll just get to reading. Italian Holocaust survivor, chemist, and author Primo Levi lived in two major spaces during his lifetime. The house in Turin, where he was born and later died, and Auschwitz. After spending a year as a prisoner, Levi returned to Turin, but the trauma of Auschwitz followed with him. Thus, Levi found his house, which was once his sanctuary, just as inhospitable as the concentration camp, and was unable to reestablish a sense of home in his physical or mental space, resulting in his suicide on April 11th, 1987, at the age of 67. This process of transference seems not just probable, but inevitable, and perhaps Sigmund Freud's theory of the uncanny can help us articulate why. Primo Levi's oeuvre focuses much of its attention on his year in Auschwitz, his most notable work being his memoir, Survival in Auschwitz, and little has been written by Levi about the other 66 years of his life at his apartment, Corso Re Umberto 75. However, Levi uncharacteristically turned his attention to his home in Turin in the 1985 essay, La Mia Casa, just 2 years before leaping from the apartment's third-floor balcony. In his article, How Much Home Does a Person Need? Primo Levi and the Ethics of Home, Robert S.C. Gordon explores Levi's thematic relationship with home that appears in much of his writing. He argues that Levi's La Mia Casa connects the home to one of the fundamental axes of Levi's work, the axis of memory. Gordon further explains the rooting of memory in the home sets the latter once again in antithetical contrast to the oblivion of the Holocaust. For Levi, the home functions as a safe place for memory and therefore an integral component of one's identity. Conversely, Jewish deportation, which Gordon describes as diasporic exile, represents the annihilation of self as memories of one's former life fade. In Survival in Auschwitz, Levi states that when he arrived at the camp, all reason dissolved into tumult, across which flashed the happy memories of our homes, still so near in time and space, as painful as the thrust of a sword. Later, after having spent some months in Auschwitz, Levi revisits the notion of home, though his tune has changed. One suffers and there is no time to think. Our homes are less than a memory. Levi devotes a large portion of Survival in Auschwitz to describing the scope of the camp, his most inhospitable and temporary home. In one passage in which he describes the death permeating every corner of the camp, Levi writes, "The Buna is desperately and essentially opaque and gray. The huge entanglement of iron, concrete, mud, and smoke is the negation of beauty. Its roads and buildings are named like us, by numbers or letters, not by weird or sinister names. Within its bounds, not a blade of grass grows, and the soil is impregnated with the poisonous saps of coal and petroleum. And the only things alive are machines and slaves, and the former are more alive than the latter." After describing the exterior space, Levi turns his attention to the interior space, the mindset of the prisoner. Despite nearly being crushed against the bottom by the sea of prisoners forced to inhabit Auschwitz, Levy says here the struggle to survive is without respite, because everyone is desperately and ferociously alone. According to Levy, the prisoners' ferocious loneliness becomes their downfall. He states, in solitude they die or disappear without leaving a trace in anyone's memory. Again, Levy likens the loss of memory to the loss of self, a process wholly dependent on the quality of one's dwelling. After his liberation, Levy is left with the sense that he too died in Auschwitz. I am not even alive enough to know how to kill myself, he writes, and he spends the next 4 decades suspended between life and death before completing the act. Though Gordon refers to La Mia Casa as an affectionate tribute to his house, written with warmth and humor, readers are left with the sense that Levy's trauma still makes its presence known at Corso Re Umberto 75. In this passage, Levy describes his home and the damage it sustained during the bombing. It is unadorned and functional, expressionless, and solid. It proved it during the conflict in which it endured all the bombings, getting away with some damage to the windows and some cracks that it still carries with pride, with which a veteran wears scars. It has no ambitions. Levy's house after the war, which he describes as lacking human characteristics but bearing the scars of World War II, is demonstrative of his own sense of self. Despite his hope that returning to Turin would allow him to heal and put Auschwitz behind him, Levy was unable to reestablish the sense of sanctuary he once had in his familial home and birthplace, a failing that may be explained by applying Freud's theory of the uncanny. In defining the uncanny, Freud writes, there is no doubt that this belongs to the realm of the frightening, of what evokes fear and dread. But the idea of the uncanny is more nuanced and specific to certain places and experiences. The term uncanny comes from the German word unheimlich, meaning not from the home or unhomely. Of course, one does not feel this eeriness every time one leaves home. Rather, eeriness is prompted when one enters a space so alienating or threatening, wherein a sense of home could never be established. Freud's theory is further complicated by the idea that the uncanny can be awakened by the reemergence of childish or irrational fears. According to Dr. Raymond Malvitz of the University of Oregon, the uncanny seems to be related to beliefs we once held when we were children, that we've repressed or covered over or hidden away to become adults. We cover over these beliefs because, of course, those beliefs are wrong and we don't want to be wrong. As an example, Malvitz refers to the childish fear of monsters, but the theory can be applied to Levy's situation when the monster under the bed is replaced with Nazi tormentors committing crimes against humanity so atrocious that one could never have believed such monsters could occupy a shared space. It's childish to believe that a monster is waiting in one's periphery, and as one matures, irrational fear is replaced by more immediate, mundane dangers. So when monsters thought to be imaginary emerge in the adult world, and in such heinous fashion, feelings of the uncanny are stimulated. However, what makes the Nazi an especially fearsome monster is that the Nazi may not be a monster at all. In his book, Writing History, Writing Trauma, Dominic Lacapra, quoting Levy's The Gray Zone, says, we must remember the diligent executors of inhuman orders were not born torturers, were not, with a few exceptions, monsters. They were ordinary men, not deranged perverts. That is the really sensational truth about the perpetrators of the final solution. Perhaps it's the Nazis' lack of monstrosity that makes him or her an especially insidious monster. His or her existence proves that there is a fine line between fantasy and reality, one which the uncanny can easily transcend. Of course, severe bodily harm was also inflicted upon prisoners, and they physically took on the brutality of their unfortunate home. Unrelenting starvation, filth, and beatings forced Jews and other undesirables to look the part of the subhuman Hitler thought them to be. Excruciatingly skeletal and bug-eyed, prisoners became the walking dead, entities in purgatory, and therefore at odds with the living world and monstrously uncanny. Long after Freud, Masahiro Mori, a professor of robotics, published a 1970 article on a phenomenon that he termed the uncanny valley. Mori hypothesized that the more an entity resembles an actual human, the more empathetic humans feel toward it, until the entity reaches the tipping point of becoming too realistic and conjures a reaction in humans of intense revulsion. The emotional revulsion takes place in the uncanny valley between the barely human appearance and the fully human appearance. Applied to the emaciated Auschwitz prisoner, as his or her body withers away, so too does the appearance of humanity. Levy's monsters were twofold: the prisoners forced into hideousness and the guards who willingly performed hideous acts. It seems inconceivable that these human extremes could exist simultaneously, but because they were forced to cohabitate, Auschwitz became the uncanny home where both ends of the spectrum were stripped of their humanity. Freud notes that the theory of the uncanny also includes something hidden inside the home that was never meant to come to light. According to Malevitz, like the word buckle, which can mean to break apart or to come together, uncanny thus means itself and its opposite at the same time. When applied to the plight of the Holocaust survivor, one is freed and returns to one's true home, but with their souls irreparably damaged. In describing the aftermath of liberation, Levy explains in Survival in Auschwitz that he is convinced that all is lost, that one cannot live here, that the end is near and sure. The here Levy refers to as Auschwitz, but the thought could also be applied to Corso Re Umberto 75. Levy's post-Holocaustal mental state is incompatible with the life he had here before Auschwitz, and a force is wakened in Levy's to an apartment that didn't exist before deportation. The force is the sense that he would forever be unsafe. Despite returning to the home where he should have felt the most protected, Levy was doomed to spend the remainder of his life sharing space with his trauma and suspended in a state of the uncanny. In Survival in Auschwitz, Levy offers a bit of advice which he is incapable of following upon his return to Corso Re Umberto 75. Take care not to suffer in your homes what is inflicted on us here.
All three panelists up. So having heard these presentations of research, and we do only have about 10 minutes left or so on the clock for this hour. So I'll go ahead and invite questions from the audience that you might have. Feel free to direct them to any of our three panelists or all three at the same time. If it's a theme or a question that easily applies to all three projects.
Dr. Blackler.
Thank you. Very well. I have a question for you, Alea, that I'm asking the class on.
Okay.
So get ready.
All right.
Janie, very quickly, just, I'm curious, did Levy ever talk about his sense of the uncanny, his lack of homelessness, lack of surviving, because he was actually turned in by Italians themselves? I'm just curious, did that ever come up?
That's an amazing question, but as far as I can remember in Survival in Auschwitz, he doesn't really touch on that.
I don't know much about it. I was just curious. We'll talk.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to say I enjoyed all of it. Janie, how did you make those pictures? Like, how did you find them?
Just a Google search. Yeah. Yeah, just a Google.
Well, they were great. I'd love to talk more about.
Okay.
Cool.
Along with that, I'm curious, in the larger research project, do you also address the connection of the picture with the theme that you're addressing in the text? Or
This actually isn't, this is the project.
that is
It's not
okay.
this work.
Sounds good. Okay.
I want to push on that a little bit because I do remember that you struggled a little bit with what pictures were appropriate to share.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the things that you considered as you're pondering how to include pictures for something this troubling?
Yeah, absolutely. I've kind of been asking a lot of my friends as I've been writing about this, like, does this sound insensitive? Does this sound insensitive? Because it's like such a fine line to cross over into. And when I was speaking about the Uncanny Valley, I considered images of sort of what I was speaking about, the more emaciated prisoners. And Caroline, I think, very correctly guided me away from that. She said we've kind of seen enough of it. But yeah, I think with talking about the Holocaust, there's sort of a fine line where you're always being euphemistic because no words could possibly capture the enormity of it, but at the same time being as sensitive as you possibly can. So that's sort of why. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, yes. And I remember it was a question of also not wanting to appropriate suffering. Right.
Yeah.
And to say that the society knows what those images look like,
Yes.
right? So then how do you bring out images that they should be very powerfully with the robotic.
Okay, cool, thank you.
I have a question for Mina. Especially with like everything that's going on right now with like how you can be more green by incorporating more bamboo products. From your research, did you notice any changes in practices to kind of maybe address that, or is it kind of a remote location of usage of bamboo that is not really affected by
Great question. When I originally had set out to do research, we thought like this green new market was already happening. And then come to find in the particular community and rural area that I was in, it hadn't quite started, but there was definitely like snippets and things to suggest that it's happening. So it was interesting to hear, like most of my participants stayed in that very traditional realm, but they were like, oh, we're hearing of these chemical pools that they're using to treat bamboo, and there's people that are cutting down everything to start bamboo, and like over and over reiterations of how that's not going to work. So I think if I were able to go back again, I'd love to be able to incorporate interviews with plantation people and organizations that are working in the region. Because again, and it wasn't all bad, like I said, there's some community projects and NGOs that are operating in the area too, that they saw as a great thing that was happening. So kind of a mix. I know I took your question and probably said too much, but the whole greening thing too is a whole other mess. Because again, as we see with natural resources, there's this greening, but it tends to perpetuate really detrimental practices. So I am very careful with how I'm defining things within my project for that reason.
Can I follow up on that just a little bit too, in terms of you were speaking at the end about how they're on the cusp of being subjected to this bamboo. What buffers were you seeing being put in place or could be put in place to kind of preserve the practices? Is there a learning curve that's been happening, or is it just sort of like a staring into the abyss?
I think a little bit of both. Definitely things are inevitable in a lot of senses, but how I kind of conclude with my project is the fact that because it is still on the cusp, there's a really good opportunity to involve smallholders within the larger policy. There isn't a lot of policy that exists around bamboo in Ecuador whatsoever. So there's this opportunity to involve them before it starts, which I think is going to be essential if it's not going to turn into what it usually does. As well as this integration of local or traditional knowledge into more scientific dialogue. So I go back and forth. I am hopeful in some senses, but also very worried and cautious in others.
All right, yeah, I'm reserving my one question for Tuesdays.
Okay.
So that's different. But I didn't know you were working on this. This is phenomenal. You presented that with passion, and I love it. It's complicated stuff. Delivered it very well. What are your plans for this project overall? Is this something that you were beginning of, or where is this going?
So this is actually the first part of my research project for my linguistic anthropology class. I'm still an undergraduate student, so I don't have like a thesis I'm working on. I do have an honors capstone that I'm kind of formulating, but right now this is my personal research in like an area of interest. I have a background in Norwegian. I can speak it at like a middle schooler level, I would say. And so making a relation to a location that I've been to that has a similar language, because they're from both
they're both from the same North Germanic language branch, which is really interesting to me. It is a really beautiful country when I was there, and I just found it so fascinating. I thought it would be really special to kind of dig back into that when I was back home, process what I had learned from the study abroad experience and like expand upon that. Linguistics really interests me in general. So my first portion was this, and that was talking about a language community and exploring how it has cultural impacts. That was kind of the main idea with like the sagas and all of that. The second part of my project later down the line for my final is expanding onto something that I've covered in my paper. And since this is an abbreviated version, I did not get to go into some of the other things that I had in there. I cut out a section about how language impacts the Icelandic national identity. And so for my moving from this project, my final project is going to be centered around language-based discrimination in Iceland for foreign workers, since they bring in so many foreign nationals to work, especially in the tourism and fishery industries, and there is a serious issue with language-based discrimination. So I'm looking to dig into why this is occurring and how that can be kind of like stemmed, looking at other countries where there's a similar systemic issue, such as here in the US, we see Asian American violence and violence against Latino people if they speak Spanish or a different language in public. So I'm looking to kind of compare those situations and see if there's anything that we can learn from that in order to kind of dissuade language-based discrimination.
Any final questions?
I have questions, but I'm keeping them for you guys.
That sounds good. It is. Well, with that, we thank all three panelists for excellent presentations.